Illuminati created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal power, the secret to consciousness, our existence itself, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller. Not some troubled youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
God's had to build my own family. I hate your son. I hate your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You in whose army, princess? You in whose army?
Oh shit. What is up, everybody? You can't see me yet. Oh, now you can. What's up, everybody? This is SilverSpook, and this is the SilverSpook live stream. Sorry, I'm just getting my thing set up. There we go. Anyways, don't forget that everything that we do here is, of course, as always, supported by the sales of that game that you just watched the trailer for, Neofeud, and of course, the sales of the Colonators as well. Neofeud is on sale this week, so it's a great time to pick it up if you have been considering picking it up for some time. Now is a good time for that. Oh, sorry about that. A little loud. Anyways, so yeah, don't forget to check it out. Check out the Colonators. Become a patron, of course. Direct donations through the StreamYards link. Sharing, liking, pushing all the buttons, doing all the things to help us get the stream recognized is greatly appreciated, as always. And yeah, so today I wanted to kind of do a stream, particularly about a particular book that I have to get ready for a seminar for. Not just because I'm getting ready for a seminar for it, but because also it is a very good book and a very important book. It is called The Red Deal. We're going to be talking about that. Also, in case you might have noticed, I'm doing 2 streams today. Earlier, we just had our stream with our brother Positive Synergy, and also member of the SilverSpook Hui here at the SilverSpook Cooperative. Positive Synergy, just in case you missed that, you should follow Positive Synergy at _1983 on Twitter and Positive Synergy on Twitch, and check the album out, of course. Perfecting Perfection, the first chapter. So there's more than one chapter coming, and this album does support Native Hawaiian education, musicians, actually this does also help support the SilverSpook Hui, because as a member of the SilverSpook Hui, Positive Synergies, the revenue stream does support all the people here. So this is a great time to get yourself some music if you missed that earlier. But I did an entire stream about this about 45 minutes ago, but I wanted to just kind of separate that from to have its own video, and this will be the video about Red Deal. So anyways, but back to the present topics at hand. which is not Will Smith. I just accidentally clicked on. But anyways, so yeah, don't forget the game's on sale. Don't forget that. Don't forget we're gonna have another Asia Pacific. We're gonna have another international panel coming up very soon. That's actually gonna revolve around the Red Deal. It is an indigenous, future-centered panel that I'm gonna be arranging. I'm in the process of arranging, I should say, with the I'm not exactly sure who exactly is going to be on it. Although Professor Flowers, you might know who that is, also known as Lua. If you know any of the online left, the YouTube, Twitter left, you probably have heard of Lua, aka Professor Flowers. You know Luna, you might know Lua too. You probably do. Luna Oi, and Professor Flowers is going to be joining us for this new panel about and yeah, this video is very important discussion about a lot of topics to do with the online left, indigenous and settler colonial people differences, let's say, particularly in the online spaces. And how that plays out. But anyways, but yeah, you should definitely follow Professor Flowers, and Professor Flowers will be joining us for this panel. Possibly, I don't have a set time and date yet, but that will be the next one. It will be centering around specifically this book, The Red Deal, as a major component of what we're going to be talking about. And the reason why The Red Deal is such an important book, to my mind, it's one of the most important books for people, particularly in the Americas. Abya, sometimes described as Abya, Hanuna, Turtle Island, known to many people who live there presently as North Central South America. But then, of course, it includes the United States, Canada. The Red Deal is very important for those people to read, in my opinion. I feel like the Red Deal should be, if there were a competent actual equality, freedom, and human rights respecting country in the United States, they would have it would be mandatory for all children, and high schoolers to have read this book. But unfortunately, there is a great lack. There's a great lack of education, on the most important education in the United States, and they're currently doing all kind of horrific things. Critical race theory is not even close to CRT. Is not even close to the kind of education that is needed. That is the beginning, but that is not enough education. That is scratching the surface. And 70%, the Republican Party have a 2% lead on the Democrats, just over a lot of nonsense and people riled up about learning just 10% or less of American history. And so, in my opinion, that's just really sad. That's just sad. But The Red Deal is a book that is very much even more important than CRT, I would say. Not just The Red Deal, but what the narrative and the story that it tells is a deeper, more powerful story. CRT is like legalist, is still too wrapped up in a Western liberal perception of the world. It is still tied to a settler colonial genocidal empire's legal system, and attempting to alleviate biased courtroom outcomes. It's not even close to sufficient. The Red Deal is what's close. There is nothing that would be sufficient ultimately, but I think that this is on the right path to actually, not just for indigenous people. That's an important point to make as well. The Red Deal is not just a book for indigenous people. It's not a book to brainwash fair-skinned people in the United States, right, into some kind of, Jeff Bezos's corrupt scheme to use land back to make more billions of dollars, which is what a lot of people in the United States left and progressive circles are saying and using nowadays. I mean, the left, center, and right have been making a lot of hay of this, attacking Black Lives Matter, attacking indigenous struggles, either trying to co-opt, trying to smother, or trying to ignore, or trying to berate, or just make it go away, And like I think what was it today? Today somebody said, I think it was Luna was talking about this. Luna Oi, not Lua, but we've all been on panels together. A Vietnamese woman used to see this actually directly ties into what we were saying here. Yeah. So Luna had this post. This actually is directly related also. So in 1973, Native American actor Sachin Littlefeather was booed and cheered by Hollywood at the Oscars before being mocked by Clint Eastwood and almost physically assaulted by John Wayne simply for asking that indigenous people not be dehumanized in film. Like, multiple people had to hold John Wayne down to stop him from attacking an indigenous woman. And this is in the context of the Will Smith events and unfolding. Will Smith is now resigned and from the Hollywood Academy. So that's a whole huge fiasco coming out from one slap. And what has been ignored is this history of violence, and that's not even speaking of the sexual and abusers and just horrible perpetrators who have never been asked to have their Oscars returned or never been kicked out of the Academy, including of course Roman Polanski, including of course Weinstein, who still has his Oscars. And there's an endless list of this, and so Sachin Littlefeather was one of these indigenous people, right, who was directly attacked. I mean, almost physically attacked and definitely verbally attacked, right? She did it to bring attention to protesters at Wounded Knee. Speaking of indigenous liberation, right? Today you can support the launch of People vs. Fossil Fuels in DC. Anyway, so this is a thread about that. But so Luna's comment is that in the exact same year, in 1973, Vietnamese diplomat Le Duc Tho was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating the Paris Peace Accords, along with brutal war architect Henry Kissinger. Le Duc Tho refused to accept it. He would not share a peace prize with a warmonger. Sachin Littlefeather made this statement with such grace, dignity, and humility, yet settlers met her with deep and immediate hatred for daring to speak her truth. Ho Chi Minh was insulted and dismissed in the same way many times by chauvinistic Western leaders like Truman. So, I mean, this is a deeper point that I often make, but that there are indigenous people all over the planet, not just in the North and Central and South America, but also in the Pacific, also in Asia, also in Africa. And there were at least there are very few remaining, but in what is called Europe, there is still there have been indigenous people, although many of them have been wiped out. But colonizers have no compassion for the victims and must be overthrown. Here is a statement of Le Duc Tho on why he would not accept the Nobel Prize. He was also severely criticized in the West by chauvinists just like Littlefeather. And he actually refused the Nobel Peace Prize, like so many other. So, like the Nobel Prize itself is complicit. Nobel itself, the organization, is complicit in war crimes, in human rights violations, in genocide, by justifying by putting Henry Kissinger on this, by putting a war criminal on the same level as a genocide stopper, right? As somebody who fought on the right side of history, as a colonized, anti-capitalist, right, defender of against an illegitimate genocidal war, right? To give Kissinger and Le Duc Tho both peace prizes is the equivalent of both sides. You know, when Donald Trump says, right, when fascist, goose-stepping, sig-heiling Nazis run over, right, an activist in Charleston, and Donald Trump says, well, there was a lot of fine people on both sides. This is the equivalent of doing that, but even on a larger scale. This is millions of people died and are still dying from the Vietnam War, which is a indigenous struggle against capitalism and colonialism together, and a successful one at that. And that's why we have the game called Decolonators, of course. And I'm just gonna throw this in there because but this is specifically what this game that I worked with Luna on is about how capitalism, colonialism, and other intersections of oppression were defeated. Patriarchy, because there were many Vietnam. That's why I have a Vietnamese woman fighter. Is because many of the most greatest fighters in the Vietnamese communist side were women, and so it was all of these struggles together, right? All of the and it was a fight that was that is never honestly depicted. It wasn't in the 70s. It was not in the era of Mr. Eastwood. It was not in the era of Mr. Wayne, right? The closest you got was Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket, and then shortly after that they made Top Gun, and America went back to making Hollywood movies that make the U.S. empire look like it's the good guys, but it's never been, right? And so Decolonators is a game that's about speaking back to that lie. It is Decolonators is the red deal, it's the red deal for Vietnam, which is called a undoing of capitalism, an undoing of colonialism, and an existence, right? That is, let's look at exactly what the red deal is, right? Indigenous action to save our earth. Was not the Vietnamese communists fighting capitalism, fighting colonialism, a indigenous action that in the long run is part of the saving of earth? It actually is. Actually, Vietnam is one of the lowest carbon footprint. They have some of the best environmental protections. They have actual indigenous based land usage, non-capitalist mass cooperatives to maximize the farming and minimize environmental damage. Vietnam is a living red deal, I would argue. It was a piece of the red deal that is far more successful than the United States, for historical reasons. So when we talk about the indigenous, that's because people. There was a Twitter space yesterday that was about identifying the it was about part of it was Russia, Ukraine, China, Hawaii, Red Hill. All these things are all tied together, but how what a better world looks like, right? Build a path to building a better world, a decolonized, socialist, better world, led by indigenous peoples around the world. And some people were saying, well, we don't know what that looks like, though. There's no examples. Nothing exists. There's no better world. All we can do is, just maybe get like a little higher pay at our job at, McDonald's or Walmart or Amazon. Congratulations, by the way, of course, to the unionizers who successfully got their Amazon union. So that is a major win. That's positive news. So anyways, but that's the best we can get is slightly higher wages under capitalism. There's no such thing as a better world. We're gonna have to work for exploitative bosses to pay also exploitative landlords, and fight for the U.S. empire, or become police officers to make living wages, and move Excel spreadsheets at big corporations. That's the best that we can get. Because that's the best that we can get. The reality is that that's false, and the reason why nobody knows anything about Vietnam for the most part in the West, and especially the U.S., is because the Vietnamese have successfully produced a indigenous future. The Vietnamese, did you know the Vietnamese have they have universally accessible and affordable healthcare. It's basically universal healthcare unless you have a lot of money, in which case, why do you have a lot of money? It's $4 insulin. Vietnamese have 40 times less malnutrition deaths than the United States. For every one person that enters, they don't have enough food in Vietnam, 40 times more people die of starvation in the United States. 40 times more people die of starvation in the United States. That's an indigenous future. That's a red deal. Basically, it's hardly anybody. There are 3,800 homeless people per million in California, and actually it's more than that now. So that means like for every person that is for every one homeless person, there's a few hundred housed people. But that's actually not a good count, because many people are drastically underhoused and they live in substandard housing that's falling apart, and it has no roof, it has no walls, or it's rotting, it's poison water coming out of the faucets, right? Millions of people, tens of millions. I've estimated it's about 70 to 90% poverty rate in the United States, according to Eastern Socialist Party standards, Chinese standards. The majority of the United States is actually in poverty because they have inadequate housing with unsafe water. That already counts as poverty, which the Chinese have alleviated, by the way, absolute poverty. So the Vietnamese have, but back to the Vietnam, they have one, it's 4 homeless per million, literally 1,000 times less per capita homelessness in Vietnam. People are worried about affordable housing and all these things. It's basically nearly a non-issue in Vietnam. Similar in China, similar in Cuba. Vietnam also has no threat of fascism. They have no police murders of innocent people. There's there was none last year, and there was none in 2019. There were 3 shootings in 2019. There were 3 police shootings. 2 were rubber bullet police shooting each other. One was over a cop who lost a gambling bet. And one person who was shot had already killed 3 innocent people and had shot other cops before he was stopped. So the United States, on the other hand, has 1,000 plus police murders per year. And that's the ones that we know about, just killing innocent people, right? So Vietnam is already a red deal. So when people say, I don't know what an indigenous future looks like, we don't know what a decolonized, right, anti-capitalist, right, socialist, we don't know what we don't know what that looks like. No, absolutely false. It looks like Vietnam. We don't know what land back looks like. It doesn't look the same as in Vietnam because it's a different material reality. Bolivia is also on a path towards an indigenous future. You have an indigenous-led MAS Socialist Party that has mass public support, has even greater than what the United States has achieved. It is Bolivia by far. They have 85% of the country going on general strikes to undo fascist and capitalist coups. So Bolivia is also an illustration of a path towards an indigenous future that has a different path. It did not involve as violent a war as the war in Vietnam. And to be clear, the Vietnamese indigenous socialist peoples didn't start the war. That was the United States that flew thousands of miles with its F-22s, its F-35s, its B-52s, its warships, its aircraft carriers, bringing its troops and its Hueys. The United States came to Vietnam and invaded illegally in the highest crime against humanity, a war of aggression under the United Nations. That is the highest crime under which all other war crimes, all other human rights violations fall. When the United States illegally invaded Vietnam. So that's what decolonization and anti-capitalist action looked like in that time. But the shooting and the fighting itself is not the extent of the total extent of the struggle. That is just the beginning, and then there is also the economic struggle. There is the cultural struggle. There is the education and fighting the sanctions and fighting the cyber warfare, hybrid warfare over decades. That's all part of this, right? That's all part of the Red Deal for Vietnam specifically. The good news is if you are in the United States, right? The good news is if you are in the United States or Canada, you have the luxury of not being in the third world exterior, the fringes of empire. You're in the imperial metropole, so the probability that they are going to bomb their own the United States is not going to, and the billionaires and the plutocrats and the generals, etc., that are working together with capitalism and colonialism are not going to bomb their own internal backyards. It's highly unlikely. The way they will bomb Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, etc. right? They're not going the NIMBY, you know. Now that's you don't have to worry about that one, but you do have to worry about the fact that they have much greater control over the information, the education, the society generally. So that which is its own struggle. That's part of why the Western left and the U.S. left, right, is very much constantly falling apart, having difficulty. They're getting COINTEL. They're getting infiltrated and internally infiltrated by enemies, and then taken down. They're getting distracted. They're having they're getting their channels removed if you're trying to speak these truths. They're getting pushed down in algorithms, right? They're getting suppressed in a whole variety of ways because the United States is the world's most powerful imperialist and capitalist superpower that has ever existed, and it's really been the central one certainly since World War II. So that has its own struggles because you're on the sometimes I call it trying to organize on the Death Star versus trying to organize on Tatooine, you know, or in Endor. When you're outside, you have a history and you have reality and you have not as deep control. You're not going to struggle as much with trying to, you know, if you're writing your own Tatooinian history books and your own Tatooinian, you have your own Tatooinian history and culture and music and songs and dance and norms, right? And then somebody comes from outside, you at least you can control what your people are thinking and feeling, and you know, what you can't control is the fact that, well, Emperor Palpatine's son and daughter don't live on Tatooine, so he has no problem bombing that entire planet into the Stone Age, right? But that's arguably that's a more difficult struggle because, you know, it's a more horrific pain, suffering, and damage than not getting your health care. That sucks. That really is terrible in the United States. That a lot of people are lacking health care that they need, but having your entire community incinerated and turned into a crater of volcanic glass and radioactive material and Agent Orange, I would argue that's worse stuff. I mean, I don't want to play a Prussian Olympics, but that's materially harder. But because you are threatened constantly in the global South with that, in the fringes of an empire, because you don't have billionaire children sitting and trying to start a YouTube channel from, you know, they're not, you know, if billionaire children were regularly starting YouTube channels, you know, and frolicking and just hanging out in unknown villages, if Henry Kissinger, JFK, and the CEO of ExxonMobil were just some random place in Vietnam in the 1970s, they wouldn't have just bomb anywhere indiscriminately, you know? Because the people who operate the empire are not going to accidentally blow their own children unless they really hate their children. But let's just say that it's children that they actually care about. They're not, you know, or it's if there's some material benefit to them, their interest, they're not going to do that, right? So that's where I would argue that's actually that is a major difference between the Red Deal's reality in the external to the imperial metropole. It's external to the first world Western capitalist countries and places like Afghanistan, places like Libya, places like Syria, places like Afghanistan, places like Vietnam, places like Korea, right? Is that the actual power structures, interests, and their actual relationship to those places makes it such that the struggle is much more dire, but it is much more. There's much more impetus. There's much more motivation to really succeed at the Red Deal in a Vietnam, in a Bolivia too, you know. When, you know, just as an example, right? When the Bolivian coup happened, right? When Elon Musk coup, whoever we want, right? When the United States backed a coup to extract the lithium, which is critical for Elon Musk batteries, right? For green imperialist batteries, green in the quotes, because not really that green actually when you look closely at it. The indigenous people were massacred. So in the United States, now not to say they don't kill and crush indigenous people in the United States, but when the coup happened in Bolivia, the U.S. police generally don't take machine guns and just shoot into crowds of protesters, right? So like when you're at when the Amazon workers, right, with Chris Smalls, very very great struggle. I mean, just as an example, right? This is very important. You know, as Chris Smalls and his fellow workers, right, won the you know, their strike. I'm sorry, when they won their Amazon union vote, right? That was a great victory. But you know what? Did Jeff Bezos send out squads of Nazis to gun down all the Amazon workers in the street? That didn't happen, right? When, as terrible as it has been, you know, like the DAPL protests, right? You know, or Line 3, you know, the Dakota Access Pipeline, Black Lives Matter actions, right? These were incredibly important and vital actions, right? And we support these. I support these, obviously. But you know, when indigenous people come out into the street to defend the sacred, does the United States send a death squad and just gun them all down with machine guns? I mean, really ask yourself that, even in so-called Canada. Do they come out into the street and just mow you down with assault rifles? They don't really do that. There's a reason why they don't do that. It's because you're too close to the suburban middle class and upper middle class and the white first world suburbanites, whom they need to maintain legitimacy of the United States and Canada as free, Western, democratic, human rights respecting powers. Not that they do, but they cannot have in their own backyard a level of violence equivalent to a Syria, a Libya, or even a Bolivia. Because if they did, it would make it a lot harder for them to wage this international optics war against China, Russia, Iran, etc. Right? It's the same reason why the human rights, the Martin Luther King struggles and the civil rights movement began as part of the actual arms race. It was actually the part of the arms, not part of the arms race, but it was a human rights respect race. Who respects the human rights? And the United States was saying Soviet Union is horrible because Gulag this and Holodomor that, there's a lot of nonsense about that. It's actually anti-Semitic and it's actually capitalist propaganda. But anyways, the United States is waging the true target is not really necessarily Vietnam, Bolivia, Iraq. Every global South poor country is target with resources in particular are all targets on imperial capitalists list. But their real enemy of colonial capitalism, right, is the Russias, the Chinas, the Russia in particular, is basically Russia, China, and anyone that is deeply allied and has power with them. The DPRK, obviously, Cuba, now Vietnam, Laos. Anyone joining the Belt and Road today is in this. That's their real target, right? And so if the United States were to come out like when Elon Musk says, right, when Elon says we will coup whoever we want, right? When he gets on Twitter, right, and he says there's an indigenous person, right, says, you know what, wasn't in the best interest of the people of Bolivia, the U.S. government organizing a coup against Evo Morales, so you could obtain their lithium, right? Again, Bolivia, Evo Morales is the head of the MES, the Movement to Socialism, again, speaking of the Red Deal, right? Speaking of the Red Deal. Right? The Movement to Socialism is a people's movement, MAS. It is Movimiento al Socialismo. It's a Bolivian left-wing populist indigenous political party led by Evo Morales. That would not anymore. I think it's Arce is the current president, if I'm not mistaken. Luis Arce, actual Marxist-Leninist economist, actually, and also indigenous. They've been in this country for a long. They are still the most popular party there. And then Elon's response was, "We will coup whoever we want. Deal with it." Literally, white apartheid, white supremacist apartheid, emerald mine, blood-covered billionaire, richest man in the world. Capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, all in one person. Comes out on Twitter with his blue check mark and his little rose right? And he says, we will coup. We will back far-right Nazis. We will. The word coup and these things, I feel like I gotta make a show or a movie where just like it really, because you can hear the word imperialism, you hear the word fascist coup, you hear the word U.S. backed, but it doesn't really hit home what these things actually mean. Supporting neo-Nazis, literal Nazis, right? They were Sig Heiling. Okay, people complain about, oh, there's fascists in America. Do the fascists in the United States come out in the streets, mow down entire? You know, when you do your protests, right? When you do Black Lives Matter, when you do a strike, when you do these actions, do they come out in the streets and gun you all down with the backing of the U.S. government? They don't do that because it would be embarrassing for the United States government. That's very the magnitude of this fact cannot be understated. This is what's happening in Ukraine, by the way. You can come out in the U.S., the government in Ukraine, backed by the U.S., the Nazis, the Azov, the Black Suns, the Stepan Bandera statue worshipping people. They literally have statues of him, and they look up to him, and they say Heil. And they say publicly, we love killing people. It's cool. It's a lot of fun. We like killing ethnic minorities, Jews, Russian, Slavs, Muslims. If it wasn't for us, our country would be full of gays. Literal fascists mowing people down in the street. They don't do that in the United States. Not because the United States doesn't support fascism, but because they need to appear in the eyes of the international community, particularly in light of Russia and China. They cannot be accusing China of human rights violations if the United States allows the fascists that it supports to mow people down inside of its borders. That's the important, inside of its borders. If Hawaii were located 3,000 miles to the west, you know, like in the Asian continent, we'd all be dead. Because we're, you know, and so it sucks to be an illegal occupation. You know, if you're outside the borders, but you're outside of the U.S. Control, then you're in a much better situation. Like if you're in somewhere in Hubei province, or if you're in Vietnam, you're in a better position. That's why American Johnson is never coming back to America, like he said. He's an American that's never going back to the U.S. because he can't get affordable health care. There's threat of fascism. It's unlivable racist capitalism. He's a white American, non-binary dude passing. He's gonna stay with Luna, you know. But if you're not inside of the United States purview, but if you're in a country the United States is able to get away with a war within, you are getting mowed down in the streets by fascists, which is what happened to the Bolivian people. So that this is qualitatively different. It is qualitatively a magnitude of difference when the government of a country supports fascists exterminating people, which the Ukraine government did when it allowed the Donbass and Luhansk shelling by literal Nazis. The United States does not allow Richard Spencer and the KKK to shell black and brown communities. It doesn't allow that, because if they do terrible things and people do die, 1,000 people get killed by cops every year. These are all terrible. But they do not allow public massacres of black and brown and indigenous. It's not that the fascists in the United States don't want to do that. It's just, it would be embarrassing, and it would make it hard for the United States to win the contest as Kishore Mahbubani, a Singaporean diplomat, actual member of the Global South community, but now, you know, as he would say, to win the contest of spiritual vitality, which is the way the United States defeated the Soviet Union, right? Is because the vitality and the belief of the masses of people inside and outside and around the world in the ideas and in the structure and in the potential of the United States, right? To see it as a city on a hill above the Soviet Union, which was losing, the people's faith in it was falling, and the people inside and outside's faith in it was falling, and that was ultimately what ended it, right? In a lot of ways. So similarly, the United States cannot win a direct war against China and Russia, right? Or any of these larger powers that form a counter-hegemonic. They're not necessarily, you know, utopias, but they are not in the capitalist, imperialist, Western hegemonic structure, right? And the U.S. cannot win against those countries if it is allowing what it does in Bolivia to happen inside of the United States and inside of Canada and inside of the UK. The Western countries must be seen as defending human rights, defending freedom, right? Not fascists. They must be seen as not Nazi. They must be seen as not racist. I mean, not that they aren't racist, but they must be able to project to their people and to the world that they are for human rights, right? For equality. That they are, and if they aren't, and if they have flaws, that they are getting better and getting better at a faster rate than China, than socialist country, than Vietnam, right? This is why you can never learn about Vietnam. It's because this contest is not who can blow up Vietnam, or will Vietnam blow up America, or will America blow up Vietnam. The contest is in which system will win, right? The American Western capitalist democracy, or the Vietnamese, or the Chinese, socialism with Chinese characteristics, right? Or it's the red deal with Chinese characteristics. It's the red, because guess who lives in China? 56 separate ethnic, diverse regions who are also on their land. Land, like that's the thing about land back in China. The land back in China means kicking out. You know who is a colonizer in China? The British, who took Hong Kong. Hong Kong is just the difference between China and the United States in a lot of ways. It would be like if the British showed up in Manhattan and then never went west, right? Or for some historical reason, they didn't make it all the way took from Manhattan all the way to Los Angeles. They take the whole thing. If the Americas were still full of indigenous people and there was just a little a pillaging colony in Manhattan, that would be like what happened in China, or more, not exactly the same, but similar, right? Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau was the Portuguese port, right? The difference is China internally, they didn't have a complete occupation by a settler colonial capitalist Western power, right? So land back, right? The red deal, again, the red deal for China looks like kicking out the British from Hong Kong. That's as one part of a bigger project. Reinstating socialism, and allowing the people to build their path, right, towards their own path internally towards a better future, right, in harmony with each other, in harmony from person to person, economically from person to nature, right, which they are on the path. They have the greatest green renewable technology of any country in the world. They're leading and they're leading in everything, period. They lead in everything, but they lead in positive change in the world, period. So that's what the red deal looks like there, I would argue. And the West can't see that because there are layers upon layers upon layers of lies that have to be unraveled before you can even get to that point of being able to see the truth of what's happening outside. But importantly, there is that is the real contest, and that is a major reason why in Bolivia, Colombia, right, Venezuela, right, Argentina, and certainly Africa and Middle East, the U.S. can get away with massacring as many people as they want with their militaries, with their U.S.-backed fascists, with their Azov Nazis, right, with their far-right Mujahideen, with their ISIS, right, with their far-right extremists in Syria, in Libya, everywhere, right. The ETIM, which is in Xinjiang, which is that's a direct one, and that's a U.S.-backed fascist, or the far right, with far right with Turkic Muslim characteristics, backed by the United States. Ask Graham Fuller, CIA super spy, and Sybil Evans, FBI whistleblower, about where all the far right extremism came out in Xinjiang, which the Chinese responded to. And so they can do that because they can, as long as the extremism and the fascism and the death and the murder is happening outside their country, right? Like Mike Pompeo can go delist ETIM and get that happen, but they can spin the narrative, right? Like when even though it is the United States, right? Even though it is the, let me see if I can find that exact one. Yeah. Even though it is the United States, right, that is directly responsible for all of the hundreds of people that have died in terrorist attacks, right? Between 1996 and 2002, we, the United States, planned, financed, and helped execute every single uprising and T-word related scheme in Xinjiang. Civil Evans, FBI whistleblower 2011. Transported to Afghanistan in the 1990s. Hundreds of Uyghurs were moved by the CIA for training in the guerrilla warfare by Mujahideen, when they returned to Xinjiang, they reformed the East Turkestan Islamic movement. And this policy of guiding the evolution of Islam, helping Muslims against our adversaries, worked marvelously well in Afghanistan against the Red Army. The same doctrine can still be used to destabilize what remains of Russian power, and especially to counter the Chinese in Central Asia. This is known, most people don't know this because there's no education in the West, but if you understand, I mean, they don't really hide it that well. ETIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, vowed to create an Islamic caliphate within Xinjiang, and they sent thousands of recruits to ISIS and al-Nusra front in Syria. Not to mention, they also killed over thousands of civilians within Xinjiang. So, in these, the United States can fund and support fascists, far-right extremists, and allow them to slaughter and kill thousands of people in broad daylight in the streets, right? Outside the United States, in Afghanistan, right? In Syria, in Xinjiang. Push them from Afghanistan, which borders on the western edge of China, from Afghanistan into China, cause chaos because the United States, it believes it can control and maintain the narrative, again, to do what? To win the contest of spiritual vitality, to win the contest of which which system appears to be superior, right? In the eyes of their own people and the world's people. And the US believes it can spin this against China, despite the horror and destruction and death being caused in Xinjiang by the United States. They believe, because of their ability to maintain and manipulate narratives, they can spin that into China's bad because they commit human rights violations. But it's actually the United States empire committing the human rights violations, right? But that's why they cannot allow, inside the United States, Chris Smalls to be shot down in the street, right? If the United States did what it did in the rest of the world, what it would do would, the United States would back its KKK, they would back its white Proud Boys, they would back its, I mean, not that they don't support in many ways their own internal white supremacy, but the government would give them license, like they did in Ukraine, to gun down Chris Smalls and gun every indigenous and every black and every workers' struggle in the street, right? If they did what they did in the United States, what they do outside, that's what they would do. But they don't do that because that would cause them to lose. I mean, I would say this. If the United States believed that it was capable of spinning the deaths, and it does do this on a certain level, right? If the United States, because every black person that gets shot by police is immediately called a drug dealer, right? A criminal. Oh, George Floyd, he was a thief. You know, he did this. He was a sexual abuser. He was a drug dealer. He was a criminal. He was bad. He was bad news. He deserved it, right? That's what over 50% of all TV shows in the United States and movies are about police, right? LAPD, NYPD Blue, all these shows, all the investigating. Still, everyone from Ice-T to Cillian Murphy is doing TV cop shows, right? The reason why you have only cop shows is that is part of the mass disinformation campaign to manufacture a continued justification for the covert mass killing and impoverishment of people of color, indigenous people, and the left. But if the police were to just come out and just start murdering everyone in broad daylight with machine guns, like they do in Bolivia, like they do in Ukraine, like they do when the U.S. supports the far right in Afghanistan, if the government were to sanction mass murder in the streets, like in the broad daylight, which is what the U.S. would be happy to do, then they're not capable of spinning that event, right? They're not capable of literally narrative control. This is what the U.S. Navy, this is what I said yesterday. It's like the victory of the victory of Hawaii, speaking of the Red Deal, the victory as part of the Red Deal for Hawaii is when the U.S. military, right, has said that it is incapable, right, of maintaining the narrative, right? The U.S. military said in this poisoning of our native Hawaiians, right, in this place where they have spilled thousands of gallons, they're still spilling thousands of gallons of jet fuel. They've been doing this for 7 decades. And this year, right, they've been poisoning us. The water is safe. They said the water was safe and unaffected. In the beginning, the United States military said our water was not on Navy water lines. We trusted them, but they lied to us. We continue to be poisoned. We continue to get sick. And all of this stuff that you're seeing, and the fact that Red Hill, the United States military has had to admit that they are doing it, and they have to order a shutdown of Red Hill and defueling of the tanks. And do you know what? Do you know what they said? Do you know what the Navy actually said? Right? See if I can find it. You know what they actually said was the reason, right? The struggle that they had. Try to find that actual narrative. Fuck. Well, basically what they said was that the U.S. military has struggled. The admirals themselves, right? The actual runners of empire. They said, we have struggled with maintaining and preventing alternative narratives from, and I put that in quotes, alternative narratives from coming to light, right? And that has been a major struggle. So what alternative narratives is another word in the United States for the truth. Because their narrative is lies, murderous, genocide, war criminal lies, right? Like, your water is fine, give it to your infants, and then they're all dying, being poisoned, right? The lie is like, the United States military isn't threatening the water for 1 million people. Lies. This is how much water is being threatened right now. You know Waikiki? You know 51st dates? You know Waikiki? You know Honolulu? You know Blue Hawaii? You know all your Hawaii vacations? All of that water is all being threatened right now. Do you know that? You don't know that because there's no truth in the West. There's no reporting. There's no such thing as journalism. But that's the narrative. But the truth, that's called the alternate narrative by the U.S. Dickheads in D.C., Wall Street, and fucking Silicon Valley, blue checkmark farms. They see the truth as a dangerous alternate narrative. But what they said was they can't control it. So my point here is that it doesn't really matter what the U.S. does. The only thing that they care about is how they can make themselves appear. And because of the push from Hawaiians and other indigenous and global anti-imperialists and environmental and a lot of socialists and left a variety of tendencies struggle and that are helping, including Mexi, including Luna Oi, including all the people that have helped get this narrative out, the actual truth narrative about what's happening in Hawaii, right? About the truth that, Hawaii is not going to clean, the U.S. is not going to clean this catastrophic gas spill because the U.S. is illegally occupying Hawaii as a platform and a gas station to plunder China, to bomb Vietnam, to massacre Koreans, and to eradicate Afghan peoples for their resources and for the military-industrial complex. And the U.S. owned troops and Hawaiian natives are expendable pawns. Because this narrative that I try to tell on my streams is getting out there, and more people are understanding this, right? That is causing difficulties for the U.S. empire itself, the entire empire, the military-industrial complex, the thing that actually runs a lot of Wall Street right now, and the greatest capitalist empire in the world. They are having problems, and I hope they keep having problems. I hope they keep what we're talking about in Vietnam, what we're talking about in Afghanistan, what we're talking about in Ukraine. Ultimately, all of this comes back to a lot of it, the empire, which is run from Hawaii, the linchpin of U.S. military strategy. Period. This is actually from 10 years ago. It's actually, Hawaii is even more central. The number one enemy is actually China. It's not Russia. That's from the DOD and Pentagon internal documents. And in order to wage their war, hybrid war, and their ongoing imperialist threats against China, they require Hawaii. So actually, the reality is, it is a real serious blow for the U.S. military to have to backpedal on Red Hill, because it is literally the gas station. It is literally the reactor core of the Death Star. We're talking about starting a strike. or organizing in the United States is like organizing a stormtrooper union, you know, because you're in the headquarters of the Empire, right? And if you're starting a union, and you know, if you're fighting a war in Tatooine or on Endor, you know, the Ewoks, George Lucas badly later said that, oh, it's actually the Vietnamese. But anyway, if you're fighting there, you're fighting outside the Empire. You're fighting their direct military, the most brutal, most violent force, because they don't care about you at all, and they're easily able to control the narrative. They've already demonized you if you're in Vietnam, because Asians are all subhuman people, right? Just like they're all being slaughtered in the United States right now. But they won't let the police come on and just gun all the Asians down, because they can't spin that. But they can kill 2 million Koreans. They can kill 2 million Vietnamese. They can't kill millions of Muslims, because those people, they're far away and they're dehumanized, and nobody cares in the West. Or they don't care enough to investigate and actually stand up for them. No, not enough white and other first world people in the Imperial Metropole care enough about Palestinians, care enough about the Iraqis, care enough about the Libyans and Syrians to do what needs to be done to help them, because, well, they have too much of a cushy deal, they're too diseducated, some combination of all of those things. And for a long time, the United States has been able to control the false narrative that Hawaii is a United States state under United Nations. It's a human rights violation. It is a gross human rights violation. The United States is illegally occupying in military occupation and has fraudulently annexed, which is illegitimate. The United States has no jurisdiction in Hawaii. The United States banned language, culture, etc. Things I talk about. They have been able to control the narrative. That's why most Americans think that Hawaii is a state. Most Americans think that Hawaiians are happy to be a part of the United States. Most Americans think that Waikiki and all these things are just nice little tourist resorts, and they don't think twice when they come on the plane, have their pina colada, get some R&R on a white sand beach, watch Hawaiians do bastardizations of the sacred dances. Oh, it's just a fun little hula dance, right? The United States has been able to control the narrative about what it has done in Hawaii for decades. Now that is a problem. Now they are not able to do it anymore. They're having difficulty. By the Admiral's words, we are having difficulty controlling the narrative. He's employed at Pearl Harbor, and it's part of his duties were to maintain. So, man, it's important to remember the job of generals, admirals, and the U.S. Empire is not just about shooting guns and firing cannons. They're actually really bad at that. The F-35's a broken a piece of garbage. It's not much better than the Boeing 737 MAX, which is a piece of Mountain Dew can duct taped to a RC car motor with programming that's worse than Cyberpunk 2077, which is garbage, right? And that's why the planes are crashing all the time. So the U.S. is not really good at making its war machines. It's what its actual tools are. It's what world reserve currency, number one, weapons of mass financial destruction, be cutting out of the SWIFT system, being cut out of the U.S. dollar. Number two, informational control. The narrative, like I'm just saying, the narrative control. So that is actually your job. Part of your job in the U.S. Military, definitely intelligence, and definitely at the highest levels of the corporate and the media, certainly. It is maintaining the narrative that the U.S. is the good guys, the U.S. is in the right, that this is all fine and good and everything, and Hawaiians just love their occupier so much. I mean, they're not occupied. Hawaiians don't even exist. They're all dead now. There's no indigenous people. Indigenous people are gone. Hawaiians are not even indigenous. They're just brown people. They're just there. Ignore their history. Just ignore it. And if you look into it, the purpose of universities is for people who get a clue or two, to have a second level story for people who have 4 to 8 year degrees. And it's still bullshit. It's like, well, the Hawaiians had a sad era of colonization, but what we can do is we're going to have a decolonization festival. Decolonize my shirt. Decolonize postmodernism. Decolonize this, decolonize, and make decolonization meaningless, and then professors can have 6-figure salaries. Well, they used to be able to high 6-figure salaries to do that. Nowadays, they're not paying too well at the universities, so. But that's the purpose of Western universities, is to give people a second. That's what Noam Chomsky is for. He took Michael Parenti's anti-imperialism, cut that all out, and they put him on in front to make it seem like there's some kind of for people who are able to get a 4-year degree, they have to have a secondary justification, a second layer of narrative control at that level, right? As the apologists for empire, but not everybody, but most people are not going to get to that level of investigation. So it's fine to just be like, well, people love Hawaii. Hawaii is a nice vacation spot. But, you know, and if you get too radical, like how not to get trashed, well, you just lose your career and you just disappear. You know, if you try to do a Fred Hampton, you're just dead. If you try to tell the truth like Abby Martin, well, you just get vaporized off of YouTube. You know, now your 6,000 hours, 1,000 hours of content, anti-imperial, actual journalism vaporized, right? If you're Danny Haifong, you can go beg for scraps. You can go beg for ramen and your rent for the rest of your life. And get your videos and your content and your Substack. You can get all of your material hidden, de-algorithmatized, vaporized. That's why I make streams that are not about what I'm saying. But you know, but even with they are doing that all the time. They're constantly fighting, right? But even with that, the United States has not been able to maintain narrative control on Hawaii, and that's why they've been forced to. They don't want to. They do not want to. By the way, read Front of a Native Daughter if you want to learn actually about the history of Hawaii. But you know, they don't want to give up Hawaii because Hawaii is the platform. It is the Hong Kong of the United States. That's literally what McKinley called it. It is a platform to plunder, imperialize, and make war and steal from China. You know, again, Hawaii is central. Hawaii is one of the most important parts of the United States empire. People don't realize this. Hawaii is not just a vacation spot. Hawaii is, I would argue, the most important headquarters of the U.S. empire. It's like if the U.S. needs to maintain any land, they could lose a lot of radioactive Colorado. They don't give two shits about the broken parts of Wisconsin. They don't give a crap about that. That's all wasteland. That's why they let everyone go to waste in that land. And everybody's starving to death. They got no housing. They got no health. They don't care. Coal miners are just being dumped. Their bodies stuffed full of fentanyl and oxy. So they die out because they're all surplus population. They don't need any of that region. They've already mined whatever they need to mine out of those regions. It's over. Fuck that region. They don't care. They're not going to. What are they going to do? They can't recycle all the radioactive poison land and the frack water that's, you know, giving children leukemia. They don't care about any of that shit. What they need is Hawaii. They need Hawaii. They need a few key sections of the coast. They need Manhattan. They need, you know, well, they don't really need Manhattan specifically, but they need that platforms and key points of trade internationally. They don't need the rest of the inside of America. I mean, they want to keep it because they don't want to have balkanization, but they don't really care. But they need Hawaii as a continued platform to plunder Asia, which is where they make most of their money. It's not coming from inside the United States. They don't give a shit about inside the United States. Not that they don't give a shit about the Asians in Asia. They don't care about Middle Eastern. They don't care about Palestinians. They don't care about West Asians. They don't care about Central Asian Uyghurs. They don't care about Afghan people. They don't care about the people in India that they put a far-right neoliberal regime into. They don't care about Asians. But they do care about the money they could make in Asia. And they need Hawaii to keep making that money in Asia. Because if Hawaii becomes an independent, neutral country, like what Ukraine will become when the Russians are finished denazifying and demilitarizing it, which, you know, again, we don't support wars, period. But Ukraine is not going to win that war. NATO is falling the fuck apart right now. When Hawaii becomes a neutral country like what Ukraine will be and what Vietnam is, the United States will not be able to plunder and bomb and refuel with the world's largest fuel facility. Again, Red Hill is not just some tank. Red Hill is 20 skyscraper-sized underground, 250 million gallons of aircraft carrier and jet fuel. It is the fuel station. It is critical to U.S. military strategy on the planet Earth, period. And certainly in the Asia Pacific, and certainly against China. So if the United States loses Hawaii, it is nearly guaranteed to lose its imperial control in Asia, in Korea, in Vietnam, and any war it would like to wage against China. That's going to be very much out of the cards. So it needs Hawaii, and so when it loses Hawaii, which it's losing, that's not the end, but that is like getting a giant spear stabbed into the heart of the dragon, like Smaug. It's like Hawaii is a big chink in the armor because it needs that fuel facility to fuel those planes. The truth is, the U.S. the military is saying they're going to put the fuel on other ships. They don't really have a plan for that. Kind of like how Europe doesn't really have an alternative to Nord Stream Russian natural gas that makes up like half of its entire energy needs. They don't really have a plan to bring U.S. in the same way that the U.S. ships bringing American low quality, threefold overpriced natural gas to Germany and to Austria and to the EU. They're promising less than 10% of the needs. Number one. Number two, they don't have the infrastructure to transport into Germany the U.S. natural gas. They don't have the infrastructure, and it's not going to be ready for at least 5 years. Similarly, the United States does not have a plan for a system to refuel all of its planes and its ships in the Indo-Asia Pacific without Red Hill. So it is the end of the U.S. empire, and it deserves it. It deserves to not be around. You know what I'm saying? And the fact that the U.S. can't keep controlling this narrative is catastrophic for the United States empire, which is a victory for us. I mean, it's not just Native Hawaiians. It's a victory more than the Native Hawaiians. It's a victory for the people in Vietnam, because the U.S. has specifically planned to use Vietnam. I looked at some of the documents. It's disgusting. They want to use Vietnam, if they can, as a Ukraine. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. They want to turn Vietnam into a Ukraine by using Vietnam against China, fomenting another war, because there was a war. The last time China fought a war outside its borders was in the 70s against Vietnam. And now they're closer now than they were before. They have differences, Vietnam and China. You know, these people's not perfect, but they're not at war now. They don't want to be. Vietnamese and Chinese do not want to be at war. They want to keep building socialism. They want to keep developing and working out their issues on a path towards a better Red Deal. They want a Red Deal in Asia for the Vietnamese and the Chinese people. The U.S. would like to stop that, right? They would like, Laos is already in the Belt and Road, and they don't want Vietnam joining. So the U.S. has actually tried to foment a war in Vietnam. And the U.S. cannot wage and support and operate a war in Vietnam if it doesn't have Red Hill. The U.S. cannot wage, they got a far-right fascist elected to South Korea. The Japanese have a burgeoning right-wing, neo-samurai, World War II-esque, scarily World War II reminiscent right-wing energy coming out of Japan. The U.S. would love that to continue. But the U.S. won't be able to do that if they don't have Red Hill. They don't have Hawaii as a platform to plunder all of Asia. So the real victory ultimately, speaking of what is an indigenous future, right? By the way, the Red Deal was one of the main contributors was a Native Hawaiian by the name of, from the Red Nation. And what is his name? I forgot. I think he coined the term militarism. It was the person on the right there. I'm trying to remember the name. He was Uahikea Maile, a Kanaka Maoli scholar and activist from Manawili, Oahu. That's pretty close to where I'm from. So the Red Deal outlines how empire and international imperialism is part of this process that has to be undone, and native peoples, and Native Hawaiians are just one of these, are key to that struggle as well. In particular, the struggle in Hawaii, which is the headquarters of World Empire, the linchpin. Do you know what a linchpin is, right? When the U.S. military says Hawaii is the linchpin of their empire, right? The person or thing vital to an enterprise or an organization, right? Without the linchpin, it is the pin passed through the end of an axle that keeps a wheel from falling apart. Without it, all of the spokes, all of the rest of the architecture of the mechanism falls apart. So similarly, when Hawaii is no longer under U.S. control, I mean illegally, technically it's under UN, it's not under U.S. control, it's under Hawaiian Sovereign Kingdom of Hawaii control, but anyway. But when the U.S. is actually de facto and in practice not under U.S. control, and Hawaii was a neutral country, that is the end of the U.S. empire. I mean, in the U.S., that's the U.S. military internal review. That image I have, that's not. They don't put that on CNN. They don't put that on MSNBC. That's like for the military times. That's like that's like for generals talking to each other. That's what you gotta read. Don't listen to any Western media. Try if you can get a hands on internal financier documents, internal politician documents, internal communications. And sometimes they have websites that do some of these. Sometimes they're public. When they talk to each other, what are they saying to each other? What is the CIA? What is the head of the CIA saying to the head of the FBI? Not what are they saying to you. What they're telling you is disinformation. That's how they make money. That's how capitalism works. On Wall Street, it's literally called asymmetries of information. That's how you make money. Like, I know that these toxic subprime, no income, no jobs, no assets loans are gonna be worth about 2 cents next year. So I'm gonna sell them now to you and make a hefty profit. That's how it works. But similarly, that's how empire works. That's how capitalism, colonialism, and barbarism and feudalism works too. It's telling everyone that this person is wearing a crown and he was sanctified by Jesus Christ superstar and God above. It's all based on lies, and that you are worthless peasants and you should worship him because he's divine, he's very smart, he's very powerful, his blood is very strong. And so it's always based on lies. Feudalism, capitalism, colonialism, slavery, barbarism, all this nonsensical Western bullshit. And so don't listen to that. The truth is they need Hawaii, and they're not going to have Hawaii. And that's really sad for the U.S. That's so sad. I mean, well, they're not going to have Hawaii if we continue our praxis, and we continue to do what we do, and we continue to struggle, and we stop our because, I mean, not just because the empire needs to go away, but also because our children are being poisoned to death. And also, even U.S. troops and U.S. officers' families are being poisoned to death. I mean, like, number one, you should probably quit the U.S. military, but I mean, isn't it a good reason? Because they're literally going to kill your infant with gasoline in their when you mix that water into your baby bottle to make the baby formula, the gasoline you're going to give your 6-month-old is going to cause permanent brain damage or death, right? Why would you want to join the U.S. military and put your little children into a gasoline poisoning position? That's just like a weird thing we do. Anyway, so but controlling the narrative, right? So the U.S. does not gun down Chris Smalls and Amazon workers. The U.S. does not massacre indigenous water protectors in the street publicly. The U.S. does not bring out the fascists that it brings out everywhere else in the world, including Europe, Asia, Africa, Central, South America, and Europe. The U.S. brings its Nazis that it is the #1 fascist country in the world. It is a Nazi country. The U.S. brings its Nazis out in Ukraine. It brings Azov. It brings out its ultra-nationalists out in Ukraine. It brings them out. It brings them out in its far right in Afghanistan, right? ETM. It brings them out in Syria. It brings its fascists out in Bolivia, right? If I can get a Sankata massacre. Bolivian soldiers and police broke up a terrorist attack. I'm trying to find that specific one. This is how they deal with you in South America. They just come out and they just blow you all. They just shoot everyone. Okay, they don't do that in the United States because that would be embarrassing, and not just embarrassing. They would be unable to control the narrative to their own people. Because what would happen if the U.S. has said, okay, go shoot all the Black Lives Matter people, just run them all down, just like we do in Bolivia, just like we do in Colombia, right? If they did that inside of the United States, what would happen if Elon just said, hey, let the January 6th fascist coup go through because I want a Nazi country I want a Nazi U.S. The U.S. would follow because the U.S. is operated by white supremacist capitalist plutocracy, right? So if Elon, Bezos, if the Clinton, Bush, Pelosi, Gates, Walton, if all the richest, most powerful families and individuals and millionaires and billionaires all got together and said, let MAGA and Trump forces take the U.S. Let the January 6th QAnon shamans, right? Let the military, the Air Force, and the Marines infiltrated Nazis and far right and white supremacists. Let them take America. Just let them take it. it would happen because the U.S. is operated by foreign of those people. The reason why January 6th wasn't allowed to go through is because what China and Russia will do. If China and Russia and Iran and Venezuela and Vietnam and all the socialist countries didn't exist, the U.S. would have let the Capitol riot go through because it would benefit white supremacist capitalism. But they can't let it go through because China is over there going, look at the U.S. saying it's democratic. Look at the U.S. saying that it's not racist. Look at the U.S. Right? China and Russia are like, look at the U.S. What are you saying that we're violating human rights? Look at you letting Nazis take your country. Look at you gunning down black people in the street. Look at you. Look at you. And then the world's going to look at the U.S. and they're going to go, oh my God. They don't even have a democracy. They let a fascist coup. They let a fascist coup, right? They let a fascist coup go through in their country. This is unconscionable. Africa's like, oh my God. We immediately have to break as fast as we can. We cannot be associated with. Even a lot of Europe might go, oh my God, what are you doing? I mean, yeah, we're all racist Nazis up here in Europe, but I mean, don't be so mask off about it. Jesus Christ. They might want to distance themselves from that. They did. France, Germany, they were kind of like, oh my God, I don't want to be seen around with Trump. Also, Trump was creating trade wars with them. Decelerated America's empire's existence by decreased the life expectancy of the U.S. empire by 7 years by Pentagon and Harvard studies. That's what they said. The Trump era, because of his breaking off international imperialism and how his organizing of and his mask off ugliness, right? Just come out and saying horrible things. Muslims are all they're all terrorists, and we're gonna ban all you brown people from those countries. Not that America treats Muslim well under Obama. Ask the people that are drone striked by Obama's drones. But Trump was just like mask off about it because he's playing to his white male racist audience, right? That's why imperialists like Nancy Pelosi, they bring Kamala in. You want a brown, happy, friendly face to control the narrative while you keep doing white supremacy internationally. But if the U.S. had a fascist coup, Asia, Pacific, the Americas, Africa, the counter-hegemonic, anti-imperialist, and many socialist and anti-racist world, right, would look at America and they'd be like, again, right, the narrative, the spiritual competition of spiritual vitality, of like an American Godsian sense, right, the belief and the faith in the United States as the leader of the free world would suddenly plummet. Like the stock price for Wall Streeters, everyone would be going short the U.S. Everyone would be going short faith in the U.S. and the free world. They'd be like, oh my God, I'm getting out of that. That's ugly. I can't. Donald Trump's. That's really what he did. He shorted the faith in the U.S. And all of a sudden, all these other countries were already moving away in a lot of ways, like India and China doing trade in $400 billion in gold from China to Iran. Russia and China increasing trade, global south increase. They're already doing that, but they accelerated under Trump. Europe was breaking away from the U.S. Ruining all of its friendships, right? Because not because it wasn't bad before, but its ability to control the narrative that America is good, free, prosperous, not racist, respects human rights, suddenly dropped, right? That's why Elon can coup whoever he wants in Bolivia, but Elon can't coup the United States government. Because how do you control that? You can't spin the Capitol 6 riots in a good way. They're trying to push it off onto just Trump. I mean, Trump is a terrible person, but they're trying to make it seem like Trump's bad, but the Democrats who are all in cahoots with Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Exxon too, they're good though. The Democrats are more competent imperialists. I believe it was Ben Rhodes, former Obama staffer, who said that the Trump-Rubio doctrine of incompetent imperialism has been a wind in the sails of the Latin American left. That was, I believe that's verbatim. It's Ben Rhodes, former Obama staffer. It's not that the Democrats don't want to be racist. They aren't racist. Not that they aren't imperialists. Not that they aren't settler colonialists. Not that they aren't war criminals. Not that they aren't warmongers. But they are competent. They are competent. The truth is, they are more competent at getting empire, getting the plunder, getting the murder, getting the extraction, getting all of this shit done. The Democrats are more competent at it in 2022. In the context of a world with Asian, with African, with Central and South American, with socialist and non-white, non-Western capitalist powers. In that world, the Democrats are the ones that can still play that game. That doesn't make them good. That just makes them better at being terrible. Right? That's why I say Obama is possibly the greatest war criminal that's ever existed, because he extended the U.S. empire by 10 years. Could have fallen apart in 08, 09, but he saved it. And that, in a certain sense, it was good that many billions of people didn't suffer and starve and endure horrible economic collapse in that time. But there's a version of the world that doesn't economically collapse, but then the U.S. empire starts falling apart much more rapidly. But Obama saved it. And so that's terrible. That's terrible. I mean, that doesn't help us in Hawaii. He's from Hawaii. But some of the worst people, I mean, he's one of the worst people on the fucking earth. So, you know, but that's, I mean, back to the red deal though. So you know, and so controlling the narrative, and so that's why. Why am I bringing up all this stuff? Why am I bringing up Bolivia? Why am I bringing this up? Because the shape of the path toward the indigenous action with allies, with comrades, right? The path towards a world that is liberated, the path towards a country, a territory, a place on earth that is liberated, is in part determined by, I would argue, largely determined by the shape and the actions and the behaviors of the colonizer, of the empire, of the capitalist that is oppressing, right? In Vietnam, the shape of that oppression, right, is direct, exterminatory, genocidal war, right? Bombing into the Stone Age, Agent Orange, scorched earth policy. That requires a different struggle, right? And different tactics, right? And again, that's what decolonization is. It's a different tactics to do land back in Vietnam. Because the narrative that right? This is where narrative is so important. The informational war, right? It's the psychological operation, the control over the maintenance of the minds and the beliefs and the worldviews and the paradigms and the reality, consensus reality in the mind, right? Vietnam has already been demonized. Vietnam is far. Vietnam, they can lie and they can manufacture an evil Vietnamese Asian communist, right? And they can, because the U.S. can maintain that narrative internally and to an extent externally, but mainly internally. The shape of the Vietnamese struggle is direct military conflict. Undoing capitalism and colonialism in Vietnam is direct military action because of the way that the narrative has been shaped and controlled by the colonizer, capitalist colonizer. Inside the United States, right? Just as another example, inside of the United States, the shape of the Red Deal, the shape of land back, the shape of the struggle against capitalism and colonialism in, let's say, the APL at the Wet'suwet'en, and again, I don't want to like denigrate those struggles. These are, of course, I'm a native Hawaiian, and our struggles are similar, right? As people inside of the United States imperial metropole, inside of the borders of what they call their territory, right? And they've been able to maintain the narrative, right? That there's technically no United States if you look very closely, but I mean, that's, but they, in the minds of 330 million Americans, and in much of the world, they've maintained the narrative that there is a United States, and it has these 50 states, Alaska, Hawaii, as broken off sections from these 48 contiguous, what the U.S. military and D.C. think tank is called, the CON-US, continental United States. And this, inside of there, the struggle is different. The struggle involves peaceful action, right? For Native Hawaiians, we call this kapu aloha actions, like on Mauna Kea, Red Hill. These involve direct demonstrations. These involve, but not just that, a lot of other things. Economic struggles, building economic sovereignty, what we try to do at the SilverSpook Hui, right? These actions, these struggles involve building worker cooperatives, unionization, like what Chris Smalls and what Amazon was doing. These are all part of a struggle now these are the Amazon is more directly a struggle against capitalism, specifically, tech magnet run, multi-hundred billionaire mega corp, such as Amazon struggle. That's more direct capitalism struggle, but these are intersecting struggles, obviously, and that is a different struggle. That is a more it is narrative. It is information. To construct a union itself is sometimes monumental, but it is often a large task of narrative control. You have to construct a narrative in the minds of your fellow workers, right? We are a class. We are the working class. We are the people that are laboring to produce the value for the boss. The boss is unjustified in this. We have to unite. That's a narrative, but not everybody believes in, right? A lot of people are like, I don't want to unionize. What if I'm working so hard? I don't want to help lazy people get away with not working and getting paid for. That's another narrative in the head that's been put there by, capitalist disinformation and all of the celebrity wealth worship and all that nonsense. And you have to undo that narrative in the minds of your worker. It's a small scale psychological operations, right? It's psyops. It's anti-William Casey's, right? We know the CIA disinformation campaign is complete when everything the American public believes is false. One of those false things is that the bosses are the most productive job creators who deserve Jeff Bezos deserves $200 billion. And Elon Musk works 2.5 million times as his Tesla factory engineers and the janitors, and that's why he makes that. That's literally how much Jeff and Elon make. They make 2 to 3 million times more per year than their average $30,000 a year workers, and that is information warfare. You have to undo that on a small scale to even organize a union. So that's already the fact that Amazon was able to get this union is already. That's also a victory, and that is a loss in the informational mind, the warfare in the minds of all of the people in the class war as part of a colonial capitalist struggle. So, and similarly in the U.S. inside the United States, that looks different. It's not getting out with the guns and blowing. It's not Vietnam the reason why it isn't is not because the United States is a good country. It's not because the United States cares about its working class. It's not because the ruling class in the United States isn't racist. It's not because the United States isn't fascist and it's not because DC and Wall Street and the rulers are above using fascists, using Nazis to gun down ethnic minorities and leftists. It's that they can't get away with it and control the narrative against international socialist and anti-imperialist countries if they were to gun down the Amazon workers. That's the difference. It's very important to remember that, because America is going to tell you, that's part of the warfare, is they're going to tell you see, look, we let you work. Look how nice we are to you. You see, we aren't racist, right? Look, we have Kamala Harris. We're not racist. We are not violent. Will Smith is violent. Will Smith is a black violent man. He's violent, not Hollywood, that manufactures consent for the wars that kills millions of people by putting billionaire philanthropist arms dealer Playboy, Iron Man, right up there, and making him seem like he's a good guy so Elon can coup whoever he wants. The violence is when one black person hits someone. The violence is some person that is nicking a pint of milk from a store to feed his child. That's violence. The police were justified, and so it's dangerous if people. It's a very complicated strategy, but you understand what I'm trying to say here? There is a reason why the U.S. holds back in its own territory, and it doesn't outside. It's not even because the military is meant to fight external threats. That's bullshit. The U.S. will use its military if it can and when it will. If and when it can and will inside its own territory. But if it can get away with it. And it has. It's bombed and killed Puerto Ricans. The police are already militarized, right? They already have military training. They're training with military forces. They have grenade launchers in kindergartens in California. Why do they have grenade launchers in kindergartens in California? Most of the mountains of police are ex-military. So this idea that there's the military for external threats and then there's no. The U.S. is not beyond taking. It is not beyond the capacity for the U.S. to use direct military force against its own people. It absolutely would if it ever came to it. It would, but it can't get away with it in light of an international competition that it needs to win to maintain capitalism in the world generally. Actually, because the world is over this capitalist nonsense. You know, the Asia, the global South, the 450 trillion stolen from Africa, from Asia, from Central South America, using the Pacific as a place to plunder it. We're over it. Hawaiians. We're over being used as the place that that world empire uses to plunder everywhere else, and everywhere else is over it too. But billionaires don't want to lose that. They're not necessary. They could go tomorrow. They don't. There's less and less of them in Vietnam and in China. They're losing they're not necessary. They don't do anything. They don't do any work. Right? To maintain their positions, to maintain Elon's position in the world, to maintain his money, to maintain Jeff, Elon, and Mark Zuckerberg's money and power in the world, right? They need to make America seem like it is the better country than China. It is, and right now it's China. They have to make themselves, and that's why they have to say China bad, China bad, China bad, China human rights violation, China stealing our tech, China doing this, China doing that. Because if you understood that the Chinese have a better life quality than you, even Uyghurs have a better quality of life than you. They have no lack of housing. There's 1,000 times less homelessness in China and also in Vietnam than the United States. If you understood, the Chinese, when they come to America and they see homeless tent cities all over their Honolulu's and their Los Angeles and the New York, they're horrified. If you understood that the Chinese are living better than you, and the Vietnamese are also living better, they don't have threats of fascism, they don't have police murders, they don't have, I mean, they have problems, but they don't have those problems. They don't have material condition lack. Certainly not they've eliminated absolute poverty. If Americans understood the reality of the successful socialists and indigenous socialists, if the U.S. understood that a red deal exists, right? The red deal is not pie in the sky, imagined communist utopia. It literally exists, and there are 4 times as many people living way better than you, eating better, dying from COVID less, not at war, not threatened with fascism and racism, and there's not zero inter-ethnic problems, but there's not even close to the United States. I just listened to a black man who lived in Asia and lived in the US and said, I would choose to live in the most racist, the most bigoted, the most anti-black part of China than live in the most progressive, liberal, leftist, the most anti-racist, nice little kind, peaceful town in the U.S. I would choose the worst part of China, and I've been there, and I can tell you, there isn't like zero problems, but it is not even close. I call it the satanic states. He's like, this is the satanic states of America. I am just stacking my dollars and cents so I can get the fuck out of this hellhole. And if Americans and black people and brown people and Asian people and also just average Americans and indigenous people in the U.S. understood that there is an alternative, that there is a red deal, and it's actually kind of, I want to say it's a yellow deal, but it's a red deal in Asia, that it exists. Actually, it's not the same. I don't want to say that it's the same because I'm speaking very freely with some of these topics, but there is a successful socialist country led by people who have existed for thousands of years on that land. What is it? What does indigenous even mean? Right? What is it? What does it fucking mean? It pisses me off sometimes. What does it mean? Is it when I do am I not indigenous because I'm not dancing around in a hula skirt for you right now? What does it mean? Because people SilverSpook, that's not indigenous because those people are in Asia. Well, what does it mean? What does it mean actually? Oh, it's people that are here for a long time and then they live in a hut and they're primitive. If I'm indigenous, either I'm not an indigenous person, in which case what do you even want for your for your land back? Either I'm not indigenous or Luna Oi. And if I'm indigenous, then Luna and Carl Jha are indigenous to China. And in that case, there is an example. And that's the real reality. Is that there is a red deal, and it looks like not just in Asia. Bolivia is a red deal for Bolivia. It's indigenous led. socialist movement with plurinationality. It's actually very similar to China. You look very closely, very similar. Multiple ethnic regions with their languages and cultures preserved, allowed to be spoken, right? Under a single state architecture, you have plurinationality. That's what they call it. This is plurinational. I forget the exact Spanish phrase, but or the phrase in their language. They opted out of multinationality because of the existence of multinational corporations, particularly in the 70s and 80s, and they didn't want to confuse people, right? Like Wayland Yutani and the Coke jobs and multinational corporate, like ExxonMobil. They didn't want to confuse people, but plurinationality, right? It's very similar to what they already have in Vietnam. Also has 54 different ethnic regions with ethnic minorities that have their rights respected, and they are given and they are required to be given those due respect. And if you violate and you are racist against the ethnic minorities, there are severe penalties. Like landlords lost all their holdings, owners and people who operated business. They lost their business license in China for when there were some violations in certain cities. Like they enforce it. America they don't enforce anything against landlords barely, and they certainly are not going to stop. Imagine if all the native Hawaiians who have been abused and we have been impoverished in our own cities, if the U.S. government, the federal U.S. government, came to Hawaii, repossessed every single apartment building, every landlord that was maltreating the native Hawaiians, which I was one of them. If every single landlord, apartment buildings, small landlords, big ones, the people, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, who both own land, they are landlords in Hawaii, by the way. Did you know that? Bill Gates. Imagine if for their violations for the racism against ethnic minorities, the federal government took every one of Bill Gates' houses and apartment buildings, every one of Mark Zuckerberg's, Pierre Omidyar's real estate, and they just confiscated it. And they said, you are not, and this is a lesson, do not discriminate, do not abuse ethnic minorities. And, you can't even think about that. It's unthinkable in this moment. Not that it's impossible, but we just cannot even begin to imagine the United States doing that in its current power structure and the way it's set up. But that's what happens, right? And that's the kind of thing that the U.S. doesn't want you to see, because what happens if Americans, what happens if Europeans, what happens if Canadians start seeing the truth about who China and Vietnam are, right? And they're like, oh my God, America is such a terrible country. America doesn't have freedom and human rights and equality and democracy compared to China, compared to Vietnam. And then America loses. What does it do? It loses the spiritual vitality competition. It loses the faith and the informational struggle. They lose the faith and the belief that the U.S. is better, and its system, its capitalist, democratic Western system, is better than the socialist path of China and Vietnam. And all of a sudden, what happens? Americans are like, what the hell am I putting up with this for? What am I putting up with this 70 million malnutrition? Why am I why am I putting up with this absence of healthcare? Why am I putting up with poison coming out of my pipes, with no house, when every single person in China, no matter how poor or rich, has a house, has clean water, has a guaranteed healthcare, has clothes? They're paying like $2 for x-rays. Why am I paying $1,200? And then you lose the competition. That's why the U.S. cannot allow its own people to witness the successful Red Deal. I will argue the successful Red Deal in China, Vietnam, Laos, to a large extent, Bolivia, and growing in Nicaragua, growing in a lot of countries. They don't want their people to witness it, because, well, that would accelerate how much they're already losing, right? So I said a lot of words, but I'm practicing. Next week we're gonna have a panel specifically about the Red Deal. I didn't really talk. I'm sorry I didn't talk specifically about the chapters of the Red Deal. I highly recommend anyone I highly recommend anyone and everyone read The Red Deal. Actually, before I end the stream, I just want to go through a little bit of specifically what The Red Deal itself is about, because I've been talking kind of around it more generally and from my SilverSpookian perspective. Let's see here. But yeah, so it is a book. It is by the Red Nation. It is a book that is you can get it from them directly. You can get it from commonnotions.org. And let's see. Whoop. Sorry, I was trying to get the. Yeah, Indigenous Action to Save Our Earth. So let's just get like a little bit of this. I'm not gonna read you the whole book, but let's just get a little bit of this. So, it is the Red Nation invites allied movements, comrades, and relatives to join for a series of listening sessions of work trial. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I think this. I'm in the wrong file. Sorry, give me 1 second. I gotta go find the correct file. Make sure I'm not in the wrong place. Okay, this is it. Yeah, The Red Deal: Indigenous Action to Save Our Earth. It is a book about the. It is a book about Indigenous action to save our Earth, ending occupation. It is part 2 is what is the Red Deal? Part 3 is sorry. I'm in part 1, right? Okay. Anyways. Okay. Who is the Red Nation? Red Nation is a group of indigenous revolutionaries, comrades and relatives first and foremost, practicing radical democracy and compassion for all relatives, despite differences in organizational role or affiliation. Equals in struggle. We are anti-capitalist, anti-colonial. So they speak often about capitalism and colonialism. Capitalism, colonialism as integral systems together. Hey, look at this game. It's about kicking capitalist colonizers out of Vietnam. Anyways, so but yeah, those systems are deeply integrated together. And it is the mission is it is to liberate Native peoples from those structures of capitalism and colonialism, centering Native political agendas and struggles through direct action, advocacy, mobilization, and education. So there's a lot to go through. I highly recommend anyone and everyone read it. As I said, end to violence against Native peoples and our non-human relatives. So, reinstatement of treaty rights. Okay, so a few specifics, right? Reinstatement of treaty rights, and importantly, not just simply in having the treaties enforced and having them followed. Because it's one thing to have a rule, like for example, wars of aggression. The United States has not actually been held to the mat, and none of these, the UN has never actually enforced. Unfortunately, it hasn't successfully enforced the vast majority of violations of its charter, particularly against Western nations, particularly against the United States. It has not enforced them. Hawaii is in illegal occupation. The U.S. is still occupying us. That's a violation of the UN. That's a violation of international law. Hasn't been enforced. So, reinstatement of treaty rights is important, but it's even more important is getting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People not being recognized. Otherwise, they would not have been violating our rights on Mauna Kea. I would not have Holly and myself and Positive Synergy and all of our fellow Kanaka Maoli and other supporters would not have had to be on that mountain for 6 months, stopping the desecration of our sacred mountain, Mauna Kea, if the UN enforced its Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but it hasn't been able to enforce it. Anyway, but back to this. So treaty rights, very much 1776 to 1871, U.S. Congress ratified more than 300 treaties with the Native nations. Provision in 1871, Indian Appropriation Act withdrew federal recognition of Native nations as separate political entities, contracted through treaties made with the United States. As a result, treaty making was abolished, and it was established that no Indian nation or tribe within the territory of the United States shall be acknowledged or recognized as an independent nation, tribe, or power with whom the United States may contract by treaty. We demand a reinstatement of treaty making and acknowledgement of Native independence. Okay, full rights and equal protections for Native people. Centuries of forced relocation of land dispossession have resulted in mass displacement of Native nations and peoples. Fun fact, more than half of Native Hawaiians have been forced out of our native ancestral lands of Hawaii. I myself, I would like to live in my hometown of Kalihi, Kalihi Palama. Number one, the water is unpotable due to copper, lead, chromium 6, the chemical that was killing people in the movie Erin Brockovich, starring what's her face, Hawaii, and then jet fuel in our water, gasoline in our water from the U.S. military. Incredible poverty rates. It costs $1 million, $970,000 for a small 2-bedroom house in the ghetto. I can't afford that. So I have been forced from my land personally. Me and my children, our Native Hawaiians, forced from our land through as a confluence of gross, disgusting international colonial capitalists stealing of our land and profiting and turning it into a cultural prostitution resort and a military gas station. I cannot be in my land. But on top of that, direct military forcing from lands historically, and most Native peoples, right? 4 of 5 do not live within the reservation or federal trust land. Anyway, so the end to the disciplinary violence against Native peoples and all oppressed peoples. The United States, more than 3 million people are incarcerated in the largest prison system in the world. Native peoples and oppressed peoples are disproportionately incarcerated and persecuted by law enforcement within the system. Native people are a group most likely to be murdered and harassed by law enforcement and to experience high rates of incarceration. Some more fun facts for you. Hawaii has the highest rate of school to prison pipeline of children, mostly of Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders descent, going straight to prison from their teenage years. In their teenage years, from high school or grade school, junior high, going straight to prison. Hawaii is the highest of all 50 states. Hawaii is the highest rate of per capita murder of police, of people of color compared to white people. Very well hid fact. Very well hid. 6 Native Hawaiians and other people of color murdered by police for every 1 white person. Very well kept secret by the United States. Indigenous people, people of color, making massive amounts, disproportionately making up these incarcerated peoples. End of disciplinary violence against all Native peoples and all oppressed peoples. The system is inherently, black people, of course, making up a huge chunk of the people in prison in the United States. Really disgusting. This proves that the system is inherently racist, disciplines politically disenfranchised people to keep them oppressed and prevent them from challenging racist institutions like prisons, police, and laws that maintain the status quo. As I said earlier, it's important to keep in mind that it is the racism, it is the racialized capitalism, it is the colonialism, and those histories and presence and the future racist capitalist Americas that the ruling class and the settler colonial participants, right? Those who participate in and would like to maintain that system and are maintaining that system, right? That results in the disciplinary violence in the prison system, in policing, in the unjust courts, in the so-called justice system and courts, right? And those systems are, it is not to say that it is impossible to have a justice system. It is impossible to have have laws that are enforced, that are, that benefit the people and aren't unjust. And you know that because indigenous people, we have had our own rules and ways of enforcing them, not generally through mass incarceration and not through unjust over-sentencing and making of covert slave and indentured servitude labor farms that's what prisons are used for, right? Most corporations utilize prison labor, including Lockheed Martin, including the White House, including Amazon. That's where a lot of Native Hawaiians work for Amazon in prisons as we speak in Arizona. making Amazon products, doing Amazon tech support, farming vegan and non-vegan cheese, creating literal goat. They're prisoners who maintain and work with goats to make the cheese that goes into the fancy product, the fancy Whole Food sections. I'm not even joking about that. And so but that is not the system that exists in Cuba, for example. It doesn't exist that exists in Vietnam, for example. They have rules, right? It's illegal to murder people and the kind of things, but they don't have. And so it's not impossible. But the character of the entire country, the commanding heights, the bourgeois ruling class, the racist capitalist ruling class, and the collaborators across classes and across race lines have and are maintaining this unjust structure. That's very important because there's a lot of, let's say, fairer skinned people that would like to assist us in this, that do not look to success. As I said, do not look to successful applications of the Red Deal, including in Vietnam and including in China, like I said, right? Like, and so if you aren't looking to successful indigenous socialist undoing of colonialisms and undoing of capitalisms and successful socialist, anti-racist, anti-imperialist places, you are doing a disservice to yourself, and you're also doing racism, because if you disregard the successes of China, Vietnam, Cuba, Laos, Bolivia, etc., and you say, well, they have a state, and so they're still bad, I don't care. Number one, that's false. You should care. They're bad, Number two, it doesn't follow my path that I want, because I'm a what? What are you? An American anarchist, right? Not to say there's a problem with that, but if you are not looking and examining the empirical facts on the ground, that is, and they just so happen to be in usually global South, brown, black, and Asian countries that the people in the United States and Canada don't want to look at. And if you are not examining those places closely and carefully with an empirical eye, you are, number one, a liar. You are, number two, probably a racist. And you have unaddressed internal. And you might not even be white. You'll be a brown. I say this as somebody who did that. You might be even a non-white. You might just being born and raised in the Western English, French, and Spanish speaking world, in the Western colonizer world. You might be doing that because you have internalized racist, imperialist, capitalist conditioning and indoctrination. You have to undo. That is a big barrier in the way towards getting an internal Red Deal, is being able to recognize external successes of the Red Deal. Or successes against capitalism and colonialism. So that's actually part of the Vampire Castle, to harken back to a white left academic, Mark Fisher, and the Vampire Castle, capitalist realism. But there's also capitalist, colonialist, racist realism. And I would argue that failure to see the successes in the global East and the South is part of that other castle, Anyways, we demand an end to the racist and violent. Anyways, but enough on that. End to discrimination against the native silent majority, youth and the poor. Native youth and native poor are an unsheltered experience oppression and killing, rape, torture, discrimination, and disenfranchisement in North America. This is part of the ongoing process of elimination of women's political and customary roles as leaders in native societies. In the United States, more than 1 in 3 native women will be raped in their lifetime, often as children. Since 1980, 1,200 native women have gone missing or been murdered in Canada. Many are young girls. Native women are at higher risk of being targeted for human trafficking and sexual exploitation than other groups. Anyways, we demand an end to legal, political, and extra-legal discrimination, persecution, killing, torture, and rape of native women. Women are the backbone of our political and customary government systems. They give and represent life and vitality. We demand that native women be at the center of native struggles for liberation. So, this is another reason why, it makes what happened, right? It makes Sachin Little Feathers booing and verbal violence and attempted physical assault by Hollywood star. Everybody loved John Wayne in his time. Even I have Hawaiian grandparents who, oh my God, I love the cowboy movies, John Wayne. Oh, Fistful of Dollars. Oh, Clint Eastwood. These guys were the biggest. These guys represented America. These were living, embodied heroes of the United States. White cowboy John Wayne and white cowboy Clint Eastwood. And they attacked and attempted to beat an indigenous woman on camera at the Academy Awards. You know, which again, in the context of Will Smith's slap, which is, you know, this was about a thing that had been talked about beforehand, and this is about a violence that Mr. Chris Rock had already, you know, a horrible joke that he'd already acted upon, and these people were getting upset, but these white American, very well loved celebrities, just because she was saying the truth, wanted to literally beat her up with fists, not with slaps. It speaks volumes here, or it should. I mean, I don't know if people are hearing the loudness of the racism and the colonial justifications here. The thing is, John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, these cowboy movies are not just about, these are central, actually. I would argue cowboy movies, I had an entire stream last year just about the Lone Rangers and the strong white individuals, as with anti-communists like Miss Soviet defector Ayn Rand, who literally wrote the Motion Picture Association screen guide for the United States, the preservation of American values. Ayn Rand wrote that, by the way. If you, where the fuck is that? I got that here. Shit. Fuck. I'm sure Holly has a link to it. You should read it sometime. Ayn Rand, preservation of American values. Let me see if it comes up. Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Values. There it is. Ideals. Yeah. Screen Guide for American. This is the literal Hollywood screen guide. Speaking of Hollywood, just really quickly, because it does intersect directly with the violence against indigenous women that Mr. Wayne and Mr. Eastwood were literally, Mr. John Wayne literally attempting to beat up an indigenous woman on stage in one of the most watched shows of the year. This was written by Ayn Rand. The Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, Beverly Hills, California. Influence of communists in Hollywood is due not to their own power, but to the unthinking carelessness of those who profess to oppose them. Red propaganda has been put over in some films produced by innocent men, often by loyal Americans who deplore the spread of communism through the world and wonder why it is spreading. If you wish to protect your pictures from being used for communistic purposes, the first thing to do is to drop the delusions of political propaganda that consists only of political slogans. Politics is not a separate field in itself. You know, this is stuff I'm saying all the time. Politics is not a separate field unto itself. You cannot keep politics out of your video games. You cannot get politics out of your Star Wars. And the CIA and Ayn Rand know this, and you should know this, but all the gamers that they are diseducating don't know this, obviously. Political ideas do not come out of thin air. They are a result of moral premises which men have accepted, whatever people believe to be the good, right, and proper human. I'm not saying that Ayn Rand is good. I'm just saying, like, everything is political. That will determine their political opinions. If men believe that every independent action is vicious, they will vote for every measure to control human beings and to suppress human freedom. I'm going to put freedom in a scare quotes there. That's Western American capitalist freedom. If men believe that American system is unjust, you see, it's about controlling the narrative. Ayn Rand knew this. It's about controlling the narrative that capitalism, individualism, rational self-interest, right? And the United States and the capitalist Western world, right, is you know, is what must be supported in the minds of the people. If men believe, it's about the belief. If men believe that American, Ayn Rand is, living in a patriarchy, and that's really weird. But anyways, everyone is just a men. But anyways, if people believe that American system is unjust, they will support those who wish to destroy it. We must make people believe, whether we are or not, that the American system is just. The purpose of the communists in Hollywood is not the production of political movies openly advocating communism. Their purpose is to corrupt our moral premises by corrupting non-political movies, by introducing small casual bits of propaganda into innocent stories, thus making people absorb the basic premises of collectivism by indirection and implication. Again, this is what I'm always saying, right? On all these streams, I'm talking about all these movies, right? Whether that's Billionaire Philanthropist, Arms to the Playboy, Iron Man, Captain Star Spangled Imperialism in America is Good Underpants, also known as Captain America, right? When I'm talking about these things, it's talking about implication, indirection, not what the story, not what the movie is saying it's about, not what the book is saying it's about, not what the puff piece about cupcakes is saying about, not what the Wired article about artificial intelligence and self-driving cars is saying it's about, not what the TV show or the Call of Duty is saying it's about. It's about implication and indirection. Those are the most powerful propaganda. Not the manifesto that you're reading. Capitalism is good. Everybody do a capitalisms. That's not how people come to believe in the justness and the goodness of Western liberal capitalist democracy. Right? It's by indirection, it's implication, and small casual bits of propaganda into innocent stories. These are not innocent. Few people would take communism straight, but a constant. This article is propaganda. Obviously, it's just about, again, it's projection of it's projection onto communists what capitalists are doing. Few people would take communism straight, but a constant stream of hints, lines, touches, and suggestions battering the public from the screen will act like drops of water that split a rock if continued long enough. That's capitalist conditioning. That's colonialism conditioning. That's your history class. That's your history book, right? That's all your movies. That's what John Wayne was doing, killing indigenous people on screen and being celebrated and being applauded. Being a lone white man. That was about thousands of drops of water into the minds of the people. The Chinese water torture. That's a projection. Chinese water torture is American water torture, where the water is Hollywood movies. But the Chinese are doing it because we only do good stuff. It's like how there are forced insertions into 9-year-old girls, indigenous girls in Canada, in order to stop indigenous people from giving birth. And then Adrian Zenz, a German neo-Nazi, working with the NED and the Victims of Communism Foundation, and the US and the CIA, took Canada's violation of indigenous 9-year-old girls by forcefully inserting IUDs so they couldn't have children to stop indigenous people from replicating. And then he said that the Chinese were doing that to Uyghurs and they were force inserting IUDs. So this is Ayn Rand is doing this is what they always do, right? But projecting what you're doing into your enemy. And so the Chinese water torture, I don't know, I don't have the receipts on that, but I wouldn't be surprised necessarily. But I mean, that is what Americans doing, is dropping bits of propaganda into your mind every time you turn on Netflix, every time you turn on your Hollywood movie, every time you play your AAA game, you read your book, you talk to other Americans in your water cooler conversation at work. You're being drip fed this bullshit every second of every minute of every day. We present below a list of more comments. Anyway, so this is where Hollywood is directly complicit in destroying the Red Deal, destroying indigenous people. It is directly complicit in all of this wrongdoing that America, by building America up, it is building the most horrific, the most murderous, genocidal, planetary destructive empire ever. And Hollywood is the even Roman, all the terrible individuals who have committed heinous acts that have Oscars are all are terrible people. So I don't want to make light of that, obviously, But to my mind, the greatest crimes of Hollywood are the continued justifications of wars, of beliefs, fraudulent beliefs in the justice of the capitalist colonial US-led system, in the US military, in the US police forces, that all the cop shows that come out of Hollywood are justifying. All the cops, bad boys, don't you, what you gonna do, that was on still being aired until 2020, until George Floyd. That came out of Hollywood. Hollywood is complicit in the murder of George Floyd, period. And every other black person that's ever been murdered by police in the United States. Because they, through their movies and their TV shows, justify in the minds and in the beliefs of the American people that the American police are fundamentally just, are fundamentally good, and the people that they are killing and imprisoning all deserve it. And that's their greatest crime. And then of the US military, of course, as well. Because that's what matters. It is a narrative war first and foremost. Ultimately, these wars, the Cold War between U.S. and Soviet Union, the war between the U.S. and China now, these will not be won with aircraft carriers and javelins and rocket launchers. You know, these will be won. It will be won in the minds of the people. If the U.S. and China go into hot war, nobody will win. There will be no winner. Everyone will be dead because it'll be a irradiated planet covered in mushroom clouds. The only way to win is not don't play the game. It is to win in the minds and in the hearts of the people. And that's what Ayn Rand was doing, and that's what Hollywood has been doing, and that's what the game industry, which is part of the Western military intelligence entertainment complex, also has been doing. Number one recruiting tool for the U.S. military: AAA games, Call of Duty, Battlefield 2042. That's where they recruit. Anyways. They don't take politics lightly. Don't fool yourself by saying, I am interested in politics, and then pretending that politics does not exist. Don't smear free enterprise. This was literally ordered, and they followed suit. Do not pretend Americanism and free enterprise system are two different things. Don't smear industrialists. Don't smear Elon. Make Elon look like the smartest, most brilliant. Make billionaires look like smart, brilliant geniuses who deserve $200 billion by making movies like Iron Man, where he is a smart, genius, brilliant world savior. And say billionaires, CEOs, too many Americans don't realize the level of propaganda that's in all their movies, including Avengers, including their Captain Americas. There's so much propaganda in these movies. Every single cop show is propaganda in the US. Every single fucking one. People don't realize it. The best time to propagandize people is when they're just chilling out, eating a tub of greasy popcorn, trying to get ready to try to recover a few spoons to survive beratement by an abusive boss and horrible, grueling Amazon, jumping and breaking your back to grab boxes full of PS4s at an Amazon fulfillment center. People don't realize that's when you're being propagandized, is when you're watching Netflix, when you're watching movies. That's when you're being propagandized. When you're playing video games, that's the best time, because your mind is checked out. You're not thinking about what you're consuming. You're just eating it, and rightly, you're just trying to unwind and relax. But your guard's down, and that's when they can drip feed. That's when they can American water torture your brain until it splits whatever leftist, whatever communist, whatever socialist, whatever indigenous support that was in that brain, and they can drip feed that until it splits open. And now you're like, oh no, cops are good though, because I really like how funny, the cops are in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Andy Samberg is fucking funny, man. Don't smear industrialists. This is literally, this is the screen guide. This has been the screen guide for Hollywood, by the way, for the last. Don't smear wealth. Free society such as America, wealth is achieved through production and through voluntary exchange of one's goods or services. You cannot hold production as evil, nor can you hold evil a man's right to keep the result of his own effort. Only savages. Only savage. That's what NATO's Jens Stoltenberg and the head NATO lawyer said to the Libyans when they asked, right? How many innocent people were killed in Libya? Can we just get statistics of who and what was bombed? How many hospitals and schools did NATO bomb in Libya? And you know what they said? Only savages commit war crimes. NATO and the civilized countries of NATO commit no war crimes. Look for that. When you see only savages something, that is phrasing that is straight from the heights of Western capitalist colonialism, racism. Only savages and communists get rich by force. That is, by looting the property of others. It is a basic American principle that each man is free to work for his own benefit and to go as far as his ability will carry him, and his property is his, whether he has made $1 or $1 million. Again, it's directly, that's Iron Man to a T, right? Iron Man. He is such a genius. He invented a nuclear-powered, adamantium, amazing jet suit with weapons in a cave. He science, technology, engineering, and math his way out of a cave in Afghanistan, in some Asian hellhole. So Iron Man deserves his billions, right? That's what Ayn Rand told. That's what the premier 1950s anti-communist author of Atlas Shrugged, Wet Dream of Milton Friedman, neoliberal guru, the neoliberals guru, that's what she literally wrote, right? And Hollywood has followed it to a T. The game industry also has been following it. Anyway, if the villain in your story happens to be rich, don't permit lines of dialogue suggesting that he is a typical representative of a whole social class. Again, yes, some people are bad, but they're rotten apples. Again, this is not like you're hallucinating. Hey, does it seem like a lot of times the rich people are maybe they're like a minor, they are a subgroup, but most the rich people and the wealthy as a class are good. The owners of capital as a class are good, but then one of them is bad. Does that ever seem like a thing? That's literally written in the screen guide. This is from like 70, 80 years ago. You're not hallucinating. This is literally followed by Hollywood because it works. Because it works. Never allow, if somebody turns out to be bad, make sure that that your dialogue, right? Your dialogue doesn't suggest that a villain who happens to be rich represents the entire class. You have to isolate, that's why, even in Iron Man, there is a bad military-industrial complex profiteer, Obadiah, right? The Obadiah character played by Jeff Bridges. But he is the one guy, he's the bad one. But Iron Man, he's the good one. This is the bad, so that actually it makes your story even better, be stronger, because it seems like you are giving a fair and balanced view. You're not a capitalist. You're just a normal, undidactic screenwriter, right? There's a few bad apples. There's some bad rich people. There's some bad poor people. But as a class, they're not that bad. That's part. Because if every single rich person is just cartoonishly bad, people are not really going to accept it, and they might think that maybe, hey, you're trying to pull a fast one, aren't you? Are you some kind of or if all the rich people are saintly and good, hey, you're some kind of rich, you must be a wealthy person lover, you must be a real capitalist. But people don't realize, right, that people think that's why people think that they're being propagandized, because they see a thing that says propaganda on it. That's the trick, is you have to hide the propaganda in little subtle hints and the little drips, right? In the little drips, like Ayn Rand said earlier. The trick is in the suggestions and the implications, not in the telling exactly what you're saying. Anyways, don't smear the profit motive. Profit is good, okay? Don't smear success. America is made by the idea that personal achievement and personal success are each man's proper and moral goals. Don't smear success. Don't glorify failure. Failure is not good. Don't glorify depravity. Don't go easy on stories about murder purpose. This is an interesting one. But anyways, don't deify the common man. Don't deify common people. Very important. Very important. Don't show common people as virtuous. Don't show common and gruesome people, like, I don't know, sorry to bother you, use unions. Don't show common people working together. I would argue this is actually inherent in movies like The Lone Ranger. You know, they literally took. I feel like they took The Lone Ranger in shows like you know, the John Wayne movies, right, where he's killing indigenous people. He is a strong individual, not a union, not the people getting together. He's a strong, particularly valiant, particularly good, particularly fast draw, particularly good indigenous person killer. Right? I'm sorry, savage killer, right? That's what they call them. Right? Killing them savages, ridding the Indians from the world, right? And the this was anti-communist. This was anti, because without collective organization, and because part of socialist, communist, and indigenous thinking is we are parts of collectives. We are working together collectively to produce, I don't know, the boss is giving us a raise in this union, right? Working together collectively to produce all of the productive labor and the outputs in the society. All of the food, the clothing, the healthcare, the housing, the rocket ships, the technology is produced by collective work of people associating with each other, working together, learning, having handed down billions of former people's knowledge and transference from their ancestors and from the entire society. Individuals are parts always of collectives. Not that individuals aren't important and don't matter, but they individually are responsible for $200 billion worth of productivity. But that's the narrative of the cowboy movies is all about individuals, and the narrative about Iron Man sure the fuck is about an individual. And Hollywood has stuck to that because there were other movies that did glorify collectives, right? And people working together, coming together to fight the rich, the powerful, capitalist, racism, etc. It's called communists fighting the Nazis. It's called denazification of Germany circa 1940 something. It's called denazification and demilitarization of fascists in Germany in the 1940s. You know who did that? It wasn't the United States. It was communists in Russia. But anyways, but that's the storytelling, is that strong individuals like Captain America, like strong white individual men like Chris Evans, personally punched out a bunch of Nazis. America didn't do the fighting. America backed the Nazis most of the time. It still does back the Nazis, like I just elucidated for the last 2 hours. The propaganda in movies and games and books and everything, it is incredibly important. It is central, I would argue. It is vital. Hollywood, movies, TV, games, MMOs, all these things, and books as well. These are as central to world empire in the minds of people as Indo-Pacific, Asia Command, and Red Hills, the 250 million gallons of gas is central to the physical world empire. It is vital. Without these movies, you can't manufacture all this consent for people being abused and how are people gonna put up with all of this nonsense about being paid like $11 an hour when they have to pay a $2,000 rent and $50,000 for their health bills? How are they gonna put up with this unless they believe they're temporarily embarrassed millionaires, that if they stick to it in America, they're going to come through? How are they not going to unionize? How are people not going to collectively bargain and kick their bosses' asses if Hollywood isn't pumping out this garbage every second, every day in your Netflix, in your books, in your history books, in your current events, in your media, everywhere, in your Instagram, in your boss babe influencer feeds? America would have fallen apart like a century ago. I mean, it almost did. But then FDR saved capitalism. But it would have fallen apart again if it wasn't for all the propaganda that is being drip fed into your brain every second of the day. And also, John Wayne is an indigenous. He was an indigenous person murderer. Now he's a professional white murderer of indigenous peoples. And that's why when he got up on the stage, right back to this, when he got up on stage and an indigenous woman was speaking, everyone clapped. Everyone clapped for Clint Eastwood and for John Wayne for attacking and attempting to assault an indigenous woman, because America was convinced by Hollywood of the savagery of communists, of indigenous people, and of the goodness of individual, strong, cis white men. And anyway, so that's what I wanted to say about that. I've been talking about that a long time. So anyway, back to the red deal though. So we demand an end to. So anyway, so we demand an end to the discrimination and persecution, killing, torture, and rape of Native. So again, on that specific topic, on the violence against Indigenous women, Hollywood is guilty of backing the violence against Indigenous women. And that's just one of their crimes. And anyways, the end of discrimination, persecution, killing, torture, and rape of Native, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and two-spirit peoples. The end of discrimination, persecution, killing, and torture, and rape of Native women. Oh, I already did that one. End of the dehumanization of Native peoples. Oh, by the way, also, it's very important to remember, within Native peoples, right? Native LGBTQ plus people experience persecution, killing, torture, and rape within Native society, within Native nations, and within dominant society. The processes of colonization and heteropatriarchy impose binary gender roles, nuclear family structures, and male-dominated hierarchies that are fundamentally at odds with Native customary laws and social organization. I can say this is definitely true for Native Hawaiians. We had, as I said, full acceptance of LGBTQ plus peoples. We didn't have those words for it, actually. Hawaiians didn't even have pronouns other than the pronoun for it, he, and she was the same one pronoun. And people, they were similar to Two-Spirit. There were people that were not of one gender or the other, were very much revered, were very important to the society, and they were similar to a lot of Indigenous First Nations peoples. They were leaders, cultural leaders, and preservers of the history often, and they were looked up to. They held privilege, they held positions of privilege and esteem. And they also, the gender fluidity was accepted within Hawaiian culture, and that was a thing. That's part of why when I present, often I'll change, because that's part of, I'll change from more masculine to feminine presentation, because that's part of what was accepted and normal in Hawaiian culture before heteropatriarchal, colonial intrusions and destruction of our culture. And so that's what part of this process, and that's what we want as well, is to demand to end to the legal, political, and extra-legal discrimination, persecution, killing, torture, rape of Native LGBTQ plus in Native societies and dominant society. We demand that they be at the center of Native struggles for liberation. The end to dehumanization of Native peoples. The appropriation of Native imagery and culture for entertainment, such as sports, mascots, other racist portrayals, celebration of genocide for holidays and amusements such as Columbus Day, Thanksgiving, dehumanize Native people, and attempt to whitewash ongoing histories of genocide and dispossession. These appropriations contribute to the ongoing erasure of Native people and seek to minimize harsh realities and histories of colonization. These appropriations are crimes against humanity. Waikiki, the Hawaii tourism industry, is one giant, multi-century, multi-trillion-dollar cultural appropriation. People need to understand this. That's another one of these deep narrative lies. The hula dances that are performed in Waikiki are insults. They are degradations. They are humiliations. They are crimes against our culture. They are not real. They are dances for the entertainment and often the sexual abuse and also resulting in sexual abuse and definitely cultural abuse of the people that are performing these dances. The themes, the Hilton Hawaiian villages, all of Hawaii tourism, including Disney, is one giant cultural appropriation that has resulted in impoverishment of our people, on top of and an added layer of humiliation of being forced to perform these bogus dances and entertainments for luring rich, paying visitors to consume. And if you're upset about indigenous headdress on a white person at Halloween or in a movie or a game, if you're upset about a tattoo, which you should be, a moko tattoo on a face in a video game, if you're upset about culture appropriation in those other contexts, and you still come to Hawaii and you consume this mass cultural prostitution in Hawaii, you are an absolute hypocrite. Also, don't come to Hawaii right now. If we have the number, we could have permanent destruction of our entire freshwater supply, making it uninhabitable on the island of Oahu. If we have too many visitors, we could already have it at this rate. But every new visitor that comes in this time right now is stressing and straining our aquifers that are already overstressed in a drought, with water usage still going up, and the salt water that's leaching, and the jet fuel that's spreading, could mean the end of the inhabitability of my entire island. So, just on that ground alone, you shouldn't be coming to Hawaii right now. But also, the entire tourism industry is premised on our genocide, our cultural genocide, and this dehumanization of our people. And I don't want to hear. A lot of people love. But I helped you. I don't care. Do you listen to indigenous people, or do you want indigenous people to assuage the guilt you feel? And do you just come there do you come to indigenous people as humans, as full equal people, or do you just want them so that you can like feel sacred today, right? And get a little get out of settler colonial guilt free card today. Do you want to just absolve you of sins? Is that what you're here for? Or do you actually, are you comrades? Are we vending machines for your guilty conscience? Because we don't need that. If you want to be part of the Red Deal, if you want to be part of the multipolar socialist, indigenous-led world, we can't be your vending machines for absolution. And when we say things that might be hard for you to hear, you gotta actually hear that and and internalize that and actually support us in that struggle. And I'm telling you right now, we don't need, certainly not now, and not in the way that the tourist industry is set up, particularly on Oahu, particularly in Kona. We don't need people visiting, and we don't need them visiting, especially now when our entire freshwater supply is in jeopardy of being permanently destroyed. You are a water destroyer. You are part of the U.S. military and U.S. capitalists' destruction of our water. You are a water destroyer if you come to Hawaii right now. I'm gonna tell you that right now. Do not visit here on your vacation anytime from now to this summer, or you are a water destroyer. You are killing water protectors. Anyway, we demand an end, access to appropriate education, healthcare, social services, employment, and housing. Access to quality education, healthcare, social services, and housing, obviously. It should be obvious. It isn't in the West. It's obvious to the Chinese, the Vietnamese, the Cubans, and the Bolivians, and the other peoples that are building socialism. It was obvious to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. That's why they had universal education and housing and healthcare. And then America, the Democrats, and the French bombed Libya into oblivion. But these should be, Libya is a red deal. It was the indigenous people of Africa. Guess how long the Libyans have lived in Africa? Thousands and thousands of years. It was an indigenous struggle with socialist successes, including millions of people getting healthcare, housing, education, African Monetary Fund helping to fund sustainable, continued industry, and other countries in Africa. That was a red deal, and that was about education, healthcare, social services, housing, fundamental human rights being met. That was a red deal of Africa. And the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Europe destroyed Libya. Bombed it to the Stone Age. Millions of people suffered. Slave markets arose, and it's been a nightmare ever since. They committed horrible, disgusting torture and disfigurement of the body of the leader. Marco Rubio tweeted at Evo Morales, I think, and Venezuela's leader, pictures of the horribly disfigured body of the Libyan leader. That was a red deal. And that's what we will have. That's what will be had if we continue this process. Access to appropriate education, healthcare, social service. Hawaii was a red deal. Hawaii was a red deal, right? I talk about this all the time in that specific sense, right? Let me see. Hawaii was a place that had all of those things that I'm talking about. Right? Hawaii had industrialization for the benefit of the masses, electricity, mass transit, railroads, right? Electric lights before the White House, like I often talk about. Hawaii had the world's highest literacy rate, 98%, ahead of Europe, ahead of the United States, the most educated, literate, technologically advanced people on the planet Earth. That was a red deal. Indigenous led. Guess who's lived in Hawaii? How long we've lived here? Basically, since time immemorial. That was indigenous led socialism. Kalakaua, one of our leaders, invented a subaquatic vehicle when Jules Verne was still dreaming of 20,000 leagues under the sea. Indigenous other people, Asians and black people, became full citizens when there was slavery and mass lynching of Asians in the U.S. and the West Coast, and the Chinese were abused, and indigenous people were being genocided in Canada. Black people were still segregated in Canada. So Hawaii also had the world's first. Hawaii was the world's first red deal. If the red deal requires access to education, 98% literacy rate, highest literacy rate in the world, Hawaii was the full red deal. Healthcare, Queen's system, right? Queen's system. Right? The world's first healthcare system was led by Emma Kalani Kaumaka Amano Kaleleo Nalani Rook. She believed that healthcare access was a privilege, not a privilege, but it was national security concern and a right. She invented universal healthcare on foot, publicly getting funding by asking for donations to start up the world's first 1859 universal healthcare system and a training center for nurses in an indigenous country, right? With technological advancement. So Hawaii was the 1800s red deal. Social services, employment. Again, that's why we had industrialization, to make sure everybody had employment, right? And fair employment and housing. There was basically no homelessness in Hawaii. Hawaii was an 1800s red deal. And what did the U.S. do? Same thing that the U.S. did to Libya. They destroyed Hawaii. They destroyed our universal health care. They ghettoized us. They banned all of our cooperatives. They banned our language, culture, history. They poisoned our water. They eliminated all of our educational gains. Now we're Hawaiians are the worst educated in the so-called United States, and which is terribly educated still. So Hawaii was the red deal, period. Under many treaties in Hawaii, but have been consistently ignored and unevenly applied. So when people tell you, we don't know what this looks like. Indigenous people leading socialism, but I have my white, I have my Karl Marx said we have to build we have to talk about class, and more class. And I have a Trotskyite. I'm an anarcho-Kropotkinist, and my book says this and this and this and this and that and this and that. And we don't know what socialism might look like. We don't know what a world without exploitation or on a path to no capitalist exploitation. We don't know what a world without a handful of wealthy elites exploiting labor value. We don't know what that looks like. We do know what it looks like. You just don't want to look at it because you're a racist Western leftist. You don't want to look at what it looks like, because people that don't look like you succeeded at socialism, at stopping racism, at having from the commanding heights a non-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist society. And you don't have any examples of that in your Europes and in your white settler colonies. I'm sorry that you don't have that. I have white ancestors too. They all fucked up. We can't deny. That's sad. But just because yourself, your fellow white people, and your white ancestors don't have any really strong, solid left, socialist, anti-racist successes does not mean you should simply disregard the non-white socialist successes. Okay? I mean, if you can't get past that, it's one of the major hurdles. You know, that's why that's a major. People don't want to admit that to themselves, but that is a major problem. Is because people don't want to. I mean, it's kind of a natural thing. You kind of want to look for people that look like you, but I mean, you got to get beyond that. You got to get beyond that. If you can't get beyond that, it's going to make it incredibly difficult and incredibly painful to have a red deal for what's called the United States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand. And Europe also, because it doesn't have a red deal either. I mean, it can get there, but you're not gonna get a better world. You're not gonna improve your own material conditions if you cannot get past that racism. I mean, as a white person, the Chinese and the Vietnamese will continue to have better material conditions, better housing, better water, better healthcare, less interethnic strife, less oppression, less abuse, less patriarchy. Trans children get free gender confirmation surgery in China, period. The US is currently trying to punish and beat up trans people as much, and it's getting people imprisoned for even helping trans children. China, you gotta get past that racism. The fact that most people calling themselves leftists and progressives in the West do not know that fact is deep, uninterrogated racism and Western exceptionalism and Eurocentrism. And if you can't get past that, it's gonna make this so hard. Because everyone else is gonna have to struggle against that. And be like, hey, let's learn from these successes. Let's work with these successful organizations. Let's build an international coalition to help us and everyone else be stronger together. And you're like, well, I don't want to look at them. I don't want to look at them because they're brown. Well, you don't want to say that. I don't want to look at them because they're tanky. I don't want to look at them because they're authoritarian. I don't want to look at them because they have a state. I don't want to look at them because it's too hard for me to read this. I mean, there's translations now. Luna Oi exists. You have no excuse to get. You can get it in English now. I don't want to look at them because you don't want to look at them because you are racist, or you're allowing that to get the better of you. You gotta stop. You gotta stop that shit. Anyways, we demand conditions. We demand the universal enforcement and application of services to improve the standard of living for Native peoples pursuant to provisions in treaties to I just talked about, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which the United States is in violation of in countless places, including Hawaii, on Mauna Kea, including in Red Hill, Kapukaki, and North America is our home, and we demand more than survival. We demand conditions and thriving. Repatriation of native lands and lives and protection of non-human relatives. Anyways, I recommend everybody read this book. Okay, read the book. We're gonna talk about it next week on a panel, and there's gonna be like a seminar. And so, please read The Red Deal if you haven't yet. It's not that long. Yeah. I think I should end because it's now almost 2. Okay. I also recommend you read Ayn Rand, what Ayn Rand, the premier anti-communist, wrote for the U.S. entertainment industrial complexes motion pictures screen guide for all of their directors and writers. Because these are things you might have thought this to yourself. Why are all the movies this way? There's a reason why they're that way. It's not just because Ayn Rand. That's part of a system. But she wrote a very important document that was followed. Okay, anyways, and not because she's a good. I mean, she's fucking terrible. She's like one of the most destructive people who wrote anything. It's God. If she didn't write some of the things she wrote, someone else might have written it. But she is like one of the most celebrated figures of capitalist ghouls and imperialists around the world, and it's really gross. Anyways, so now. Thank you so much for watching. Again, the game that supports everything that we do here is called Neofeud. Neofeud is a dystopic cyberpunk adventure game in the vein of Blade Runner. It is a game that is about my experiences as a Native Hawaiian, as a activist, historically as a person that was. Speaking of Red Deal, real quick. Speaking of Red Deal, this is my little bit where I talk about Neofeud a little bit. But Neofeud is a game that's specifically about the struggles of Native Hawaiians in Hawaii. It is an anti-capitalist, it is an anti-racist and anti-imperialist cyberpunk game. And I made it while working 40 plus hours in social services, teaching in ghettos, while being homeless with my family, as I often bring up, eating spoonfuls of peanut butter for dinner, feeding the kids ramen with a little bit of frozen peas and carrots thrown in because we couldn't afford food other than that. And so Neofeud is specifically about all these intersecting systems in Hawaii. Now, it's not just about Hawaii, but it is personal experiences of mine reflected through the science fictional lenses of sentient machines and half human animal hybrids and this cyberpunk hellscape sort of place. But it is ultimately about my life. I often describe my work not as science fiction, but as stylized journalism with futuristic characteristics. The art, stories, gameplay of Neofeud are direct reflections of my upbringing and my experiences as a Native Hawaiian STEM teacher for underserved youth of Honolulu's inner city, teaching robotics, programming, sustainability in difficult, stressful, Kafka-esque endeavors, being in the richest, most beautiful place on earth, yet dealing with families of working parents who are living out of a van or sleeping on the street, trying to keep kids out of gangs, off of drugs, and on paths towards better opportunities, such as the ones that I had growing up in a slum area of paradise while going to an upscale private school, because I taught there, and we got free tuition. It's $20,000 a year now. Hawaii is a postcard Corona commercial scenery sort of place, but it is not all fun and sun for everyone who actually lives here. I grew up a Native Hawaiian on the not so nice side of the coconut trees where the tour buses avoid, where Red Hill is located. My parents and parents' lived in poverty-stricken area of Kalihi Palama, cleaning for, teaching kids of dancing fake plastic hula for the profit of mostly white Ford millionaires and billionaires of Hawaii. I'm a third-generation neo-feudal serf. My friends in the neighborhood live 22-hour house, surviving on ramen and food stamps and spam. Ramen and spam from food stamps, just dirt poor. On the weekends, we would run through the forest barefoot, playing games like Rock War, which is about whipping rocks at each other, trying not to get bloodied. They were wild kids, but we had good times, building tree houses and cannonballing into tin roof, a big pond in the back of the valley. And then we would all pile in on Monday with my siblings and in a cheap old Toyota Corolla, not unlike Boots Riley's Sorry to Bother You, Cassius Green in his drawstring Honda with an orange hood and a black roof and a white door, because you can't afford parts that match the same color. But anyway, so I had we would shuttle off to an elite college prep school that we could only afford because Dad taught there. Obama's school is right across the street. It's more than $30,000 a year now. I was one of the poorest ghetto sprawl kids amongst the upper crust corporal children. It was a horrific 12 plus years at the school. Everybody didn't have holes in their schools. They came in Mercedes and they came in limos. Dodgeball was illegal to avoid lawsuits. I was an overweight brown Hawaiian kid from a ghetto amongst a lot of wealthy, fairer skinned whites and Asians. And as you might imagine, I was singled out along class and race lines, got made fun of for having old shoes looking different, Dad's rusty beater car versus their Mercedes. In Gibsonian cyberpunk terms, it's like waking up in the sprawl, going to school in the Villa Straylight, returning home to the sewer every night. I never learned a single word of Hawaiian in the private school, with few coloring books about ancient Hawaiians that are gone now. The message from school, TV, and movies was basically, I'm an American, but not quite. Wrong color. Maybe 3/5 of an American. Public schools teach even less. Hawaiian language is illegal to speak in Hawaii until 1986. And in 2018, a professor from Maui, Kalekoa Ka'eo, was arrested for speaking Hawaiian in a court. Children were punished last month, February, or 2 months ago in February, for speaking Hawaiian in school. Children were put outside, elementary-aged children, for speaking Hawaiian in a school in Hawaii as punishment for speaking Hawaiian. The only words that businesses and imperial interests want you to know is aloha and mahalo. Aloha, here's a lei for you as you get off your air-conditioned plane with a fake Hawaiian woman on the side, owned by a white man in a mansion with a gaudy golden bird of paradise gate that makes $3 million a year. Aloha as you step into a high air-conditioned tour bus that takes you to your air-conditioned high-thread count hotel, and then you have Mai Tais on an artificial white sand beach and watch bastardizations of our sacred dances, hula, perform for $7.50 an hour with cellophane grass skirts. Mahalo, thank you so much for enjoying our starvation wage prostitution of our culture, people, and island, while we drive our 30-year-old Toyotas and take the bus back to dilapidated Vovela favela and live 20 to a house and fight with each other over the money that we don't have for medical bills, cry into our ramen, get diabetes, and then die at the age of 39. This is what being indigenous Hawaiian has meant. It's meant having no idea who the hell you are, because who you are has been obliterated. It means commodified versions of yourself, prostituted for the profit of foreign capitalists, and then you're forced to participate in your own for-profit humiliation for 40 years of your life until you die. It means being erased, abused, annihilated physically, mentally, and spiritually, having no idea who your abuser is. I still get into arguments with my mom and dad to this day when I talk about decolonization. They say, hey, we're all Americans now, Chris. Just be thankful for what we have. And they keep slaving away at the age of 70. My parents still work, by the way. Past the age of 70, probably till they die, teaching the children of aristocrat, future owners of Hawaii, the children of Pierre Omidyar, the children of Jeff Bezos, the children of Mark Zuckerberg, the richest of the world. They teach their children for nothing, who will become owners of the biggest corporations, the Hawaiian Airlines, the Sheraton, for table scraps. Native Hawaiians, as I already said, they're shot 6 times more per capita than white people. Worse than any state of the United States, but shot by the police. The world of Neofeud, where you have the equivalent of the Palace of Versailles literally floating above an endless cross between Honolulu slum and a Brazilian shanty escape, and a mega landfill, is taking my experiences and cranking the knobs to 11. Neofeud is a reflection of the sick nature of blood quantum, racial class, discrimination in hiring, SAT apartheid, etc. And countless kids I work with who were sent off to prison making Amazon Whole Foods, as I said, vegan and non-vegan cheese, or mechanically separating Tyson chicken nuggets, or putting together the furniture for the White House for 25 cents an hour in a prison for the rest of their life. There's a difficult scene where a player character is actually asked to do a CPS examination of a robot family's house. They have a government-issued checklist to fill out access to clean water. They don't have it because they've reconfigured the tap to spout Valvoline oil. Because again, this is science fictional refraction of my experiences. But these would be non-white people having their children taken. But in the game, it's robots. Anyway, they're robots. They don't have clean water. What do you put down? Do they have safety hazards? There's a smelting furnace and hot metal in the kitchen. Hot liquid metal in the kitchen where dad's melting Coke cans and aluminum bikes to recast replacement cyber arms because they can't afford refurb care. Do you put presence of fire hazards? Technically, this is unsafe, but if you answer the form properly, the family will lose their kids, whom they obviously love and they care about. Like many Hawaiians have had their children stolen because they don't fit artificial standards in situations constructed by the colonizer. Many indigenous people in the US, so-called US and so-called Canada, have lost their children because of artificial poverty enforced by their colonizers, and then they lose their kids to destroy indigeneity, put them with white families so they have the indigeneity is cut off from parent to child. That constitutes genocide in the UN, not enforced by the UN, unfortunately. I wish it was. What follows is the militarized SWAT police, and also the sir, we have a court order to take your child into custody. For the sake of your family, please step aside. What follows is the militarized SWAT police coming in and doing what police in America do dozens of times a day to unarmed innocent people of color, including kids that I've worked with. They can't tell the story because they're dead or they're in prison forever. And so the cop tells you, well, don't worry, he disobeyed a police command after he shoots someone. And we have a deal with the tech companies to limit media fallout. You know, like how Abby Martin and journalists are getting their accounts wiped off of Twitter and off of YouTube and off of everywhere, you know? Anyway, it's a very difficult scene, which many people have cried through, or they said that they felt like throwing up, but at the same time, they also say that it's one of the best or most important scenes in Neofeud. Cyberpunk should involve facing reality, not escaping into neon theme parks. Anyway, so that's Neofeud is based on. This is literally like areas where I worked in Honolulu. It kind of looks like this, just people living in tents on the street. Nowhere near the hotels where the tour bus is. They hide this from your eyes, so you can't see all the homeless Hawaiians. Anyways, that's enough of that. That's just a thread about the game, and what it's about. But I gotta head out because it's lunchtime, and yeah. So don't forget, if you can pick up the game, it's on sale. If you have a second to leave even a very short review, it is greatly appreciated because it does increase the likelihood that people will find the game when they're browsing on the Steam. You can also find Neofeud on Windows on itch for Windows, Mac, and Linux. It is on itch.io, and it is DRM free. And you can also give the maximum revenue to the creators, us, when you pick the game up there. Of course, you can also pick up Decolonators, which is a game that I've already talked about a bit. It's the Red Deal for Vietnam. It's indigenous land back. It's kicking capitalist and colonizer butts and bringing about indigenous-led socialism in Vietnam, but as a video game. And also, it's a Contra style. So if you like retro games, this is the one for you. Play it on your stream. Play it for your friends. I mean, mainly I want people to like learn about this history that too few people know about. So, Decolonators, but it also supports us here at SilverSpook. Hui. You can also pick up Woman, which is a book by Holly E. Argent. You can get it for free, or you can also give us some money and donate some money for it. And it's a book that is about a woman raised in right-wing evangelical Protestant Christianity in so-called Canada, and it is a book that is a irreverent version of the life of Mary, and it is a book that's very much might be interesting for those who have had to endure right-wing white evangelical Protestant Christianity somewhere in North America. And so that book is free, and you can also donate. And of course, you can always support us through Patreon at patreon.com/Neofeud, where you can give us ongoing support. And also, you get access to the Discord. You also get access to SilverSpook Discord. You also get access to behind the scenes work on Neofeud 2. And at the highest level, you can talk to me for half an hour a month about whatever topic of your choice. Somebody's actually called that in, so that is a. I mean, that's a lot. It's a very high level, but I mean, I feel like I hope it's worth it. It was worth it. It was worth it to talk to one of our supporters who was doing a lot of good work in Europe and trying to stop the imperial and racialized capitalism and colonialism that continues in there. So, anyways, consider becoming a Patreon patron. You can also follow us at SilverSpook Guy, at SilverSpook Games, at Octodon.social, on SilverSpook Games, on Mastodon, which is a federated, open source, non-capitalist social media platform like Twitter, but without billionaires, Wall Street, the Pentagon, and Silicon Valley tech magnates deciding what you see and what you don't see. However, while we have access to the Death Star satellites, you can follow at SilverSpook Guy for my personal takes and stuff like that, and you can also follow SilverSpook Games for the game stuff, because I do video games, obviously. Follow SilverSpook Games for games related stuff, minus the Ian Silver, like when Neofeud goes on sale, which is now. Tell all your friends and comrades that haven't picked it up yet. Consider picking it up. Neofeud 2 updates on the game. I'm currently working as hard as possible on Neofeud 2. I'm gonna work some more on Neofeud 2 today. Like every day, I'm trying to work on Neofeud 2 to get the game done. On top of streaming and everything else that we do here. But you can also follow Terminus C. Terminus Cyberstar is a Twitter account for another game I'm the content director / lead writer on. It's a low-poly cyberpunk RPG like Deus Ex and System Shock. It is currently being worked on by a handful of folks, including writers, musicians, artists, level designers, programmers, etc., that are working on this game. This is one of the latest screenshots from it. Looking very good. They've added all kind of cool stuff to it. They've added weatherized systems. They've added elevators and like 100-story skyscrapers, and they're doing a good job. So looking very much forward to this game myself. But if you want to follow this game, it is on Terminus C, and you can also join the Discord over there. Oh yeah, and you can also follow, of course, our brother Positive Synergy and our fellow member of the SilverSpook Hui, Positive Synergy at _1983, who is a native Hawaiian musician and trying to spread education and aloha, and also working on music, and currently working on promoting the album that was just finished yesterday. So do go and check out the album Perfecting Perfection at positivesynergy.bandcamp.com. Please pick up the album Perfecting Perfection. It's a really great album with very important songs. I mean, do you want to participate in the Red Deal, or do you just want to hear me talk about it and then do nothing? I'm just kidding. But I know if you're following, you probably are doing something. But one thing you can do to support indigenous struggles for collective liberation and against capitalism and colonialism is to pick this album up, to keep doing the education. Because Positive Synergy, I know, is trying to do as much education on streaming and on Twitter and other spaces as possible, and also through this album itself. So if you get the album, it does support positive synergy, and also in the beginning of a musical career that is sure to be long and very successful. And of course, great songs like Land Back. I mean, his lyrics is really based, has literal, like, this is like, you should all read From a Native Daughter. And this is very how Nani K. Trask would approve of this song, I think. As a Native Hawaiian anti-imperialist, one of our greatest fighters and educators, and this is a really great song that's about all these things, and I really recommend it. Anyway, all the songs are really good. Also, this one, Through the Eyes of a Comrade. I mean, all the songs are good, but the Through the Eyes of a Comrade and Land Back are two like of the most directly political songs. Anyway, so yeah, check that album out. And also, Holly, you know Holly, I'm sure, but if you don't, you should. Well, Holly, we already talked about Holly's book, but Holly is a mod, VA, and partner of me, producer and writer for Goblin Mother, which is Kate Nix, which is a really cool musical and creative show for all of the Mischief for Misfits and Monsters. And Holly helps write and produce those shows and mods, and also works with Magic Storytime, which is a really cool magic show that is live streamed on Twitch. Holly's also does is the main caregiver for 2 Keiki. Those are children here at the SilverSpook Hui, and is also my partner in producing of children, and also the partner in of the worker cooperative of SilverSpook games. And yeah, so follow Holly and learn about this stuff, and all kind of. Holly's currently painting really cool art all over the walls. Looks really good, like 70s curve rainbow patterns, and Holly's doing all kind of stuff all the time. We're all kind of all doing stuff all the time, but Holly's got a lot of what do you call it, irons in the fire all the time, and we're very grateful for all of this. So anyways, that's the end of this stream, and thanks a lot to Big Teal for hanging out, and everyone else who's been in the chat. I'm sorry, I don't look at all the chat in this morning stream, but thanks very much. Mahalo nui loa. That means very big thank you in Hawaiian, basically. And we'll be back in the evening time for just hanging out and chilling out, and yeah, what am I doing? Support your land back, support your indigenous peoples, support decolonization, screw capitalism, Ayn Rand, yikes, John Wayne, oof, and we'll see you later on for some Neofeud 2 and fun stuff. All right, take it easy, guys.